Knights rise toward a mighty power, shouting to see the emperor who brought conquerors to their knees, crushed the merchants, and earned their loud praise. They chant that their emperor defeated the unbelievers and proudly call themselves the great defenders of their faith and protectors of the Messiah. The knights, raising their hands in excitement, shout that they have crossed oceans, mountains, and deserts, winning victories on 3 continents. On the mountain's edge stands the majestic silhouette of a rider, while the crowd continues to shout that they are the great heroes of Lemuria. The name of this noble man is Hercules, the supreme emperor of 3 continents and ruler of divine light. Hercules proudly raises his sword, hearing the passionate cheers of his followers. Long ago, there was an emperor who transformed the fallen Lemurian Empire into a powerful state spanning 3 continents. The story of Hercules begins in his childhood, racing across the lands of Lemuria, shouting wildly that it will never happen. Riding fast and shouting out loud, he declares he doesn't want to be emperor. Hercules is the 3rd prince of the weak and dying empire of Lemuria. After the death of their father, the late emperor Adrien III, the throne was left empty, and although Hercules was not meant to inherit it, he had to step up as the next ruler due to his 2 older brothers' inability to take the throne. The thought of becoming emperor of even a small, weak country felt worse to him than any punishment, and he was furious that his brother's incompetence forced him to take the throne. He shouted that he just wanted to live his life in peace and at his own pace, when a girl's voice behind him asked him not to be so selfish. Hercules recognized the voice and realized he was caught. It was Karolina, his childhood friend who had always been watching out for him. He got angry, never imagining she would go so far as to catch him. As Karolina kept chasing him, she asked why he was running, and he replied by asking if she was still chasing him, to which she said she couldn't catch him otherwise. She shouted for him to stop running and become emperor, but he angrily asked if she was joking. Hercules refused to rule a weak, exhausted country on the brink of destruction. At one point, Karolina reached out, grabbed him by the collar, and sharply pulled him down, making him fall off the horse onto the ground. He barely had time to gather himself and open his eyes before she was on top of him, not letting him get up. With pride, Karolina declared she had caught him, looking down confidently, while Hercules clenched his teeth in anger and shot her a fierce glare. Once the Lemurian Empire spanned 3 continents and was the most powerful military, economic, and cultural force, leaving an unforgettable mark on history. This land, etched into the world's memory, was created by elves, priests, and powerful women gifted with the ancient strength of the elves. Once the world's mightiest empire was torn apart by civil war into east and west, with the western part destroyed, while eastern Lemuria also declined under waves of invasions from various peoples. Hercules bitterly reflects that the country has lost 60% of its land, and with most fertile fields and access to the sea gone, trade has become nearly impossible. Perhaps this is the root of its decline. At that moment, an old man approaches the young men in the field and asks about their affairs. They immediately recognize him as Adrien III, the 19th emperor of Lemuria, and bow to thank him for the prosperity achieved through Ila's efforts. The emperor says that if all goes well, the country won't face hunger this year, and he apologizes to the common people for all the hardships. He turns to the little Hercules standing nearby and asks how he's doing, emphasizing that the future of these lands depends on him. Hercules sits quietly with a book in his hands, ignoring the invitation to come along. The emperor approaches and suggests showing him the lands, noting that he can finish reading later. Hercules just lifts his head, glances around, then goes back to reading, saying it's just a regular wheat field, so he'd better finish the book. The emperor takes the book, explaining that the author saw the world as it is, but real emotions from life can't be felt just by reading pages, while Hercules frowns angrily. Looking around, he notices 2 people working and asks his father what they are doing. She explains that they are gathering wheat ears to grind the grain into bread. Hercules sees the workers' hands tiring from the tools and thinks that using them must be uncomfortable. He points to them and suggests replacing the sticks with something like a comb. The emperor is puzzled about what the comb has to do with it, but in the end, everyone decides to give it a try. The workers cheer happily that the job is now easy and their hands don't get tired, while the girl says this way they can process several ears of grain at once. Hercules explains that using both hands and your own weight makes pulling the ears of grain much easier, and if we build a small platform, even kids like this girl will be able to work. He proudly claims that this will save a lot of effort and greatly boost productivity, and his father praises him. The emperor asks how he knows this, and Hercules explains that such a tool appeared during the Edo period when farmers invented many new farming implements. Then he grows awkward, unsure how to explain his knowledge. Looking away, he says he read about it in a foreign book, and his father proudly replies that his son is truly a smart one. Hercules believes their libraries and archives don't have this information, but he has his own secret. He has advanced knowledge of science and technology but keeps it hidden. People often called him a prodigy, and his father indulged his every whim. It was precisely because of this knowledge that he lost his freedom and became a victim of unrealistic expectations. Back in reality, he hears Karolina demanding once again that he become emperor. Hercules notices her hand pressing on his stomach, blushes, and asks her to get down because she's heavy. Karolina says that if he climbs down, he'll run away again. Then she starts to say she feels something hard beneath her, and Hercules panics and screams. She tries again to persuade him to become emperor, stressing that he has the knowledge and skills for it, but he refuses, shouting that he will never be a ruler. All sweaty, he says that when he grows up he wants to travel, but for now, he's just gathering knowledge and has no intention of becoming a servant of this country. He already demands that she get down, firmly stating that he won't let the Imperial title take away his freedom. She asks if that means he doesn't want to be with her, and Hercules pauses, looking at her with a questioning gaze. Karolina says she loves and wants to protect the country once ruled by her father, Emperor Adrien, and has always dreamed of seeing a new Lemurian empire built by Hercules. She cries bitterly, saying she wants to see him crowned emperor. He suddenly jumps up, fearfully asking why she's crying. She tries to speak through her sobs, but he gathers himself and swallows his words. He humbly promises to take Karolina with him on the trip. She calms down and asks if it's true, and he, gently stroking her head, assures her it is and that he'll do anything she wants. She asks if he will let her read the martial arts book her mother forbade. He says, "Go ahead." She asks if he'll come for tea. He quickly replies, "I will." She asks if he'll become emperor. Without hesitation, he says, "I will." Silence falls. Hercules looks at her, and she looks back at him, no tears left in her eyes. She suddenly grabs him by the collar and pulls him up, while he, sprawled on the ground, yells, asking what she's doing. Karolina, glancing back, says a warrior must use any weapon to win. That's what Hercules' father used to say. He calls her name desperately, then, horrified, shouts through the forest that she has deceived him. And so, in front of many subjects, he solemnly ascended the throne and became emperor. Sitting on his throne, Hercules adjusts his crown and mutters how awful it is to be trapped in such a place. He speaks aloud about the chronic trade deficit and the land steadily lost to other peoples, weakening the nation's survival, and he can't believe his father died leading such a country. He says with despair that his freedom was so brief, and now the imperial life has begun. Suddenly, a dark, shadowy hand appears behind him, followed by the silhouette of a woman with long hair floating in the air. She claims she already told him that he is destined to become emperor. She gave him a lot of knowledge about another world and hopes he can put it to good use. Indeed, he holds a wealth of knowledge from another world, but it wasn't originally his. The true owner was born and raised on Earth, in a country called Japan, and seemed to be named Sarari Ishishichi. He was able to solve all the problems he faced so far only because of this knowledge from another world. And all of this is the work of a strange demoness, dressed in blood-stained clothes with long black hair and a torn smile. He asks if she even realizes how much headache all this has caused him. In another life, he was a boring and foolish person, yet this knowledge is definitely useful. The demoness says she has great hopes for him, calls him a future great hero, and then disappears. Hercules, on the verge of a breakdown, shouts that he's ready to give up the throne. Then another man enters, sighs, and says that Hercules doesn't at all resemble the man who just took the throne. This is Christopher Augustus, Hercules' uncle. Hercules asks suspiciously if he's really a relative, noting he doesn't look like anyone in the family, then points a finger and asks if he was the one who gave their father the idea. Hercules accuses his uncle of favoring him over his two brothers and calls him a troublemaker, while the uncle reflects and says he doesn't remember anything special, though Adrien often mentioned him. He starts listing how Hercules spoke at 2, could read and write by 3, and by 4 had read every book in the castle, but still wanted more. Hercules covers his ears and asks him to stop. Also, the uncle heard that he invented the senbakoki, which greatly improved wheat harvesting efficiency, and since then, the harvest has grown exponentially. With a smile, he says that both the people and the former emperor were very pleased, and that his rise to the throne was the right decision. Hercules sighs deeply and dreamily says it would be great if someone rebelled against him. Just then, a subordinate rushes up in a panic and addresses his imperial majesty. The uncle jokingly remarks that someone has arrived who's about to start a revolution in the atmosphere, and Hercules says it's a bad time for that. This is Galphus Galanos, Karolina's father. He apologizes to Hercules and says they should now discuss the empire's management together. Hercules covers his ears from the noise and remarks that he finally understands where Caroline gets it from. A young man appears from behind and asks not to speak that way, saying Galphus is always like that. This is Lucanos Lucolios, the patriarch of New Lemuria. Hercules asks Lucanos if he's been here the whole time, And Lucanos replies that he has, and it's terrible. Sighing, Hercules says that the room is filled with his maternal relatives, a soldier, and an entire unit, while he himself is just a 12-year-old emperor. He stands up and declares that the country is doomed, takes off his crown, and tells them to keep playing politics without him while he relaxes in the library as everything falls apart. Lucanos, with an awkward smile, says there's probably nothing to be done and they'll have to rely on Lady Karolina once again. A little later, Hercules gazes dreamily out the window and says he was born into a terrible world to become the emperor of a country nearing its end. He recalls the faces of his people begging him to save their country, and tenses as he remembers the hum of their voices. He closes the book and tells them that only they bring him silence, peace, and comfort. Ugolos adds that beyond the castle walls, many more lessons await him, but only books help him discover his true self. Smiling, he says that books are the best companion, pulling him out of this narrow world. He opens another book, wondering which world it will take him to today, when suddenly Karolina appears around the corner in a panic, startling Hercules and making him scream across the library. She awkwardly asks what happened and hears that she caught him in the same place again. She yells that she heard him. He's dodging work once more, and Hercules grumbles indignantly that someone told her everything again. He says that with so many people involved, he doesn't need to handle politics himself, and reminds everyone that he's not forcing anyone. The title of emperor alone is enough for him. Karolina looks at him closely and asks if he even understands anything about politics. He gets angry and asks her to repeat what she just said, but she turns away and says it's a shame, since Adrien himself admitted it. She walks away, feeling ashamed. She thought Hercules could instantly solve the country's financial problems, and she adds that she probably made a mistake because he's only 12, which makes Hercules' ear twitch. She keeps going, asking what his father would think if he heard this, and Hercules stands up, asking if she really thinks he's a child. She turns around and he laughs, saying he obviously understands politics. So what does she really think about how much he knows about the world? Hercules confidently says solving the problem will be a breeze once you understand it, and Karolina asks if he can do it right now. Hercules grows even angrier. He says that if she insists, he promises to improve the Empire's financial situation within 3 years. Karolina looks at him happily, and he sets a condition. If she succeeds, she has to grant him one request. She hesitates at first, then agrees, promising to do whatever he says, and he gladly reminds her that she agreed to it herself. This is how the challenging journey of young Emperor Hercules began, who, relying on his knowledge, conquered 3 continents as the Emperor of Divine Light. Nova Lemuria has changed beyond recognition, and is now known as the city that holds 2/3 of the world's wealth. The empire amassed great wealth by passing goods through its lands, with its long-lasting prosperity fueled by transit trade made possible by its strategic location. This method has 2 drawbacks. First, it depends heavily on the political situation and the economic conditions of import and export at the final destination. The second point is that all these benefits inevitably flow through a neighboring country, the main enemy of the great empire, the Fur Kingdom. Hercules stands before a huge bookshelf, picks up a volume, reads it with interest, then closes it, reflecting on what he's learned. He says this means the Lemurian Empire needs to find a new source of income that doesn't rely on transit trade. Everyone in power starts cheering, telling Hercules that he's finally motivated. Hercules grunts angrily but doesn't object, while those around him exchange surprised looks, unsure of what came over him. The uncle happily declares that he has finally made up his mind and become a true emperor. The believer says that now they can prevent the fall of the Lemurian Empire, but Hercules, tiredly glancing at them, replies that he hasn't done anything yet. Her father praises her and pats her on the head, saying she did well. She smiles and agrees while Hercules looks at them with hatred. He recalls his own words about how he would improve Lemuria in 3 years. Now he thinks about how foolish he is, but he knows there's no turning back. Sweat drips down his face and his cheeks burn. A girl asks him if raising the funds in 3 years is a crazy idea, and Hercules touches the book, saying it's possible. So he starts with something simple, easy export of goods. He explains that besides wheat, the empire's main food, they also grow grapes and olives, which are processed into the empire's main exports, wine and olive oil. These are the country's main export and financial resources. But all countries produce these goods, and the First Kingdom's craftsmanship is just as advanced as Lemuria's, so competition keeps profits almost non-existent. He says that to restore the finances, we need to create a unique product that exists only in Lemuria, and everyone is listening with great interest. Suddenly the maid enters carrying cups and a teapot. Everyone turns as she pours the dark liquid and serves each person. The onlookers watch the drink tensely. Its color is black and no one dares to take a sip. Hercules takes a confident sip and tells the others not to be shy, he just made it himself. They try to refuse, but Hercules smiles and insists they give it a try. Everyone takes a cup, and one of them notices a strange smell coming from the drink, prompting everyone to sniff it suspiciously. They all take a sip at the same time. At first, with indifferent expressions, but Karolina and her husband quickly grimace, saying it tastes awful, while the priest, smiling, says he feels energized and likes it. Karolina asks if it's some kind of medicine because it tastes too bitter for her, and Hercules replies that he understands. He takes the cup from Karolina, suggests trying it differently by adding milk, and stirs it carefully. He reaches the cup back, and Karolina, looking closely, sees a cat's face drawn in cream on the surface of the drink. She smiles happily as she looks at the drawing from the side. Hercules tells the others he added the same thing to their cups, so they should try again. They both take a sip and their faces light up with pleasure. Everyone agrees the drink is smoother now, except the priestess, who says she preferred the old version. Karolina smiles and says it's very tasty, while Hercules, smiling, points to the cup and announces that it's coffee. The people present don't understand what coffee is. Karolina asks her father if he knew about it, and he honestly replies that he has never heard of it. Hercules gently wipes the foam from Karolina's lips with his finger, and explains that he learned about this drink on a train a few years ago, where it was grown in a church to help priests stay alert longer. He explains that the country has few water sources, and the available water is hard to drink. So the main drinks in Lemuria are grape wine and another beverage that can be stored for a long time. But they get drunk quickly from it, so wealthy aristocrats prefer to drink tea brought from the East, which remains expensive due to import costs. Coffee doesn't have set production methods, but it can be grown in Lemuria's climate and soil, and marketing it as a special Empire product will definitely attract attention. Everyone is silent, except the priestess, who says everything is clear, and Hercules' uncle agrees that the coffee should be sold as a special Imperial product. Someone tells him they're not impressed and angrily asks what that's supposed to mean. He explains that he bought a white porcelain tea set from the Silk Lands of the East, known for making this rare and expensive porcelain, just for the drink presentation. Hercules lifts the cup calmly and says it's made of porcelain from Lemuria, leaving everyone staring at him and their cups in complete shock. The priestess says it's impossible. White porcelain is a patent of the silk-producing eastern lands, and even the earliest kingdoms don't have that technology. Hercules listens calmly and takes a sip of his coffee. He explains that it's bone china made in 18th century London, but since no one knows what London is, Hercules ignores them and adds that the white color comes from animal bones. He says all their porcelain used to be black, so he decided to make it white. Although production is still experimental, it looks fantastic. Uncle Hercules exclaims in amazement that this is incredible. He takes a cup of coffee and admits that he used to think Lemuria was stuck in the past, but now he sees it's home to incredibly advanced technology. Karolina's father adds that he never expected to witness anything so impressive. Meanwhile, Hercules wonders how much he paid the craftsman to make the porcelain as quickly as possible before he returns to the palace. He tells his team that the porcelain is far from perfect and there's too little coffee to sell, while a handful of coffee beans rests on a napkin on the table. Hercules explains that first they need to raise funds and find skilled craftsmen to make porcelain, which he plans to sell initially to aristocrats and merchants, with the set consisting of 2 parts, bone china and coffee. With a determined smile, he declares that coffee and porcelain will become the Empire's prized goods, and everyone present happily agrees. Karolina says this has brought hope for gradual financial recovery, and her father eagerly urges them to start selling right away. Hercules thinks to himself that without establishing a monopoly on these goods, porcelain and coffee won't change the situation. And even if he succeeds, the Empire's financial situation won't improve for at least 5 years. He knows he has to make it happen within 3. Approaching the window, he looks up at the sky and says that now all that's left is to review the administrative documents. In the castle, he flips through piles of books, then sits at the desk and starts drawing with a ruler. He draws every detail, sighs tiredly, and takes a sip of his own coffee to stay alert. 3 months into reviewing the documents, he finally spots the problem. Books, scrolls, and papers are scattered around. Looking at the charts, he says that, as expected, the main causes of the economic downturn are rising military spending and declining tax efficiency. Later, gathering a round table for negotiations, Hercules announces that everything is ready and suggests starting. He apologizes for the sudden meeting but says the Empire needs urgent action. All the officials sit there confused, wondering if this is normal since he's only 12. Hercules calmly sips his coffee while Karolina shoots angry glances at anyone who speaks against him. Hercules announces the start and, noticing the boy next to him, asks why he's seeing him for the first time. The boy, panicking, introduces himself as Crowell and explains that he'll be in charge of all the records today. Hercules, with a slight smile, asks Crowell to explain the tax system, and he begins his report. He explains that the Imperial system consists of 6 main taxes: land tax, poll tax, trade tax, import tax, military tax, and a tax on freeing servants. He adds that the Empire holds a monopoly on salt. Hercules thanks him, praises his work, and encourages him to keep it up. Crowell, flustered by the praise, can't compose himself, while Hercules begins to summarize what he's heard. He argues that the poll tax, trade tax, import tax, tax on freeing servants, and the salt monopoly should be abolished or reconsidered. At first, everyone freezes, trying to process what they heard, then bursts out shouting, "How will they collect taxes without this?" Hercules calls for calm and promises to explain everything. First, he talks about the poll tax, showing a list and explaining that it's a record of the Empire's citizens who are being taxed. He hands it to Crowell and asks what he thinks. Crowell looks around and says there are too many women here. And Hercules shouts, "That's exactly the problem. There are also too many people with disabilities registered." He explains that in the Empire, the poll tax is higher for men, lower for women, and even less for people with disabilities. And with these simple paper reports, a family of 4 men and 2 women can just list 2 men and 4 women to receive benefits. Someone points out that the country has 10 million people, and it's impossible to check everyone. Hercules agrees. He says that because there was no way to verify, people started claiming vision or hearing impairments to avoid taxes, and they've been successful at it. Addressing all the politicians, he asks if they can confidently say the data is accurate, and as their expressions change, panic begins to set in. Hercules calmly sips his coffee and says he doesn't need a system that can't collect taxes properly, so it should be scrapped. Everyone falls silent, exchanging glances. Crowell is stunned. These noisy bureaucrats are suddenly speechless. Hercules turns to Crowell again and asks him to explain how the trade tax is calculated, and Crowell replies that the rate depends on the profit and the type of goods. Hercules asks how the merchant's exact profit is determined, and the merchant replies, "It's based on the merchant's own word." Hercules then exclaims, "That's the problem. You can just lie," and poor Crowell can barely hold on. Hercules explains that merchants easily falsify the numbers, and while this tax brings in significant revenue, it is paid as a mandatory fee. He says he won't change the trade tax policy, but due to the labor, time, and personnel costs of unannounced inspections, they can't afford to continue like this, so the system needs to be reviewed. Next, he reads that import taxes only hinder the flow of goods and bring in minimal profit, while the tax on freeing servants is completely outdated, so why keep this dusty old system? Hercules says both taxes will be abolished, while Crowell, surprised, wonders if all 4 systems disappeared, or were sent for review in an instant. Next, Hercules moves on to the salt monopoly, and everyone instantly tenses up. He explains that this policy, introduced during the late Adrien's reign, provided the Empire with a new source of revenue. What couldn't be raised through the poll tax was made up by selling salt at prices 30 times higher than usual. Hercules says that salt is essential for people, so they would buy it at any price, but he discovered something else. At that moment, the priestess approaches with a tray holding a small pouch, and the entire nobility reacts with horror and panic, fully understanding what it means. Crowell looks on, puzzled by what he sees. Hercules calls Karolina over to try it. She tastes it and tells Hercules it's just regular salt, better and cheaper than the Monopoly brand. Hercules says this smuggled salt is much better than the Imperial monopolies, and, what's more, it's sold all across the country at a pretty low price. He adds that the presence of such salt on the streets means someone is secretly pulling the strings, while politicians hide their faces and look away. Hercules sternly addresses everyone, asking if they are mocking his father's tax system, and under the tension, everyone breaks out in sweat and avoids his gaze. At this moment, Karolina's father boldly draws his sword, while Hercules asks if everyone here buys the exclusive Imperial salt. Crowell, panicked, can't understand the bureaucrats' reaction. Could they all be involved in smuggling? A heavy silence falls. Hercules smiles broadly and apologizes to everyone present, causing them all to suddenly look up at him in surprise. He claims that the system, designed only to fix a broken tax policy, is unstable and harmful, so it will be abolished, leaving everyone in shock. Hercules adds that he's willing to turn a blind eye to the issue of smuggled salt. Everyone interested starts twitching nervously as he clarifies, it will only happen under one condition, leaving everyone guessing what that condition might be. Hercules says the merchants should form a trade guild. Everyone looks at him in surprise, while Crowell starts to think it over. He explains that with current methods, merchants can fake their profits, and it's impossible to keep track of it. If a guild is formed, the number of inspections will decrease, and cross-checks between guilds and merchants will give the government at least some control over the economy. Some people point out that forming a guild could lead to higher prices, as setting one price would encourage other sellers to do the same. Another person adds that many see trading as a dirty business because money is made through tricks, not hard work, and Hercules is outraged, asking how they can live with such thoughts. He says that if there are few buyers, they should come together and find a way to sell to them, rather than mindlessly raising prices, or else the goods will go bad. He adds that the merchants already have their own unofficial guild, so it's worth leveraging that for the benefit of the empire. Addressing everyone, he snaps his fingers and announces that he has created a new tax system, inviting them to join. The uncle is handing out flyers, and Hercules says that there are no emperors or bureaucrats here now. Just people who want to revive Lemuria and have the power to do it. He urges everyone not to be afraid to challenge his decisions, while they all quietly focus on reading the documents. Seeing their reaction, Hercules says he thinks their pay is too low and promises that if the reforms succeed, he will personally ensure fair wages. With a smile, he invites everyone to work together, giving their best effort. The attendees respond enthusiastically, saying they would like to ask questions and discuss the details. So, the hall erupted into heated debates that lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. After many revisions and improvements, a new tax system was introduced and announced throughout the entire empire. 2 years after its implementation, tax revenues increased by about 1.5 times compared to before. The use of taxes, including expenses for maintaining the imperial palace, was reviewed, and all imperial treasures without historical value were sold. Thus, the treasury of Lemuria began to steadily recover, and the 14-year-old Emperor Hercules gained strong support from the merchants who managed the state's logistics. Karolina says it's great, and believes he can solve the empire's financial problems in less than 3 years. Hercules proudly says he knows this and asks why she won't pat him on the head. She happily reaches out and agrees. Suddenly he blushes, turns away, and gets nervous. She asks if he's sure about going out to the city, since such a crowded place would definitely cause a stir. Hercules replies that everything is fine because to Karolina, he's still the same as always, and to the rest of the world, he's not who they think he is. Karolina looks at him and asks if he used some kind of magic. She adds that, just to be clear, he's not planning to leave the castle in disguise and skip his duties, right? Hercules replies that Christopher and the others will handle that. He reaches out his hand and says he wants to show her 4 landmarks of Lemuria today. She looks at him surprised and blushes. They arrive at the museum, and Hercules says this is the first place he wanted to show her. Karolina looks around the many art exhibits in surprise and asks what this place is, and Hercules proudly replies that he built it, leaving her impressed. He asks if she remembers when they opened the warehouse during the financial audit. He planned to sell the excess artworks to replenish the treasury, but many were of great historical value or too precious to sell, and he was sure he would be cursed if he did. There were so many exhibits that they decided to display them here, and Karolina listens carefully while taking in the hall. Stopping by one item, she asks if it was kept in the state warehouse. Hercules explains that this is the private property of an aristocrat. Originally, they planned to display only items from the castle, but the nobility insisted on showing off their own wealth as well. With a sly smile, he adds that they pay rent for the space, visitors buy tickets, so the profit is quite good. Noticing Karolina's lack of reaction, Hercules gets upset, saying this isn't what he expected. A demoness appears and says women aren't interested in men's bragging. Hercules angrily tells her not to show up unannounced, but she insists she's just offering advice. She explains that Karolina, like most people, thinks differently and seems not quite ready to appreciate art yet, so she suggests showing something simpler, while Hercules listens and considers other options. He decides to head to the next spot, the street market he used to visit often. At the market, everyone is bustling, selling bread, washing clothes, sorting grain, and Karolina, amazed, says it's so lively here since she's never been to a place like this before. Hercules explains that ever since Lemuria controlled 2/3 of the world's wealth, the market shelves have always been stocked with a wide variety of goods. In fact, having no other way to attract people, they decided to build a museum right next to the market so visitors would go shopping afterward. He adds that skilled craftsmen here can make a souvenir with her name and date, even if it's not currency, and Karolina is genuinely surprised and delighted. She says that thanks to Hercules, this place has really come alive. He agrees, picks something up, hands it to her, and asks what she thinks about the necklace. Hercules loudly says Karolina's eyes look like rubies, then adds they're even more beautiful. She blushes and says he's flattering her, and he replies that if she likes anything, she should tell him and he'll buy it for her. But she refuses, saying it's too much. Then, looking a bit embarrassed, she adds that she doesn't need it. Since birth in the Gallianos family, her father, a soldier, taught her only martial arts so she could protect Hercules. She smiles and says she's sure that none of these necklaces would suit her. Hercules asks if that means she doesn't want a reward from the emperor, and an awkward silence falls. She panics, saying she meant something completely different, while Hercules laughs and asks why she won't just accept it, since he wants to give her a gift. He says Karolina is very beautiful and will look great in anything, which makes her even more shy. Turning away, she asks him to stop teasing her. But he smiles proudly, thinking that's exactly what she wants. Karolina then turns to the jewelry table and notices a necklace with a large dark stone. Hercules notices her glance and asks if she likes something, but she quickly looks away and says no. She doesn't like anything here. Hercules decides that given the circumstances, it's best not to show her the aqueduct under construction, a structure carrying water across a ravine or river at this time. He pauses, realizes what needs to be done, and they watch the horses race, with Karolina's face glowing with pure childlike joy. She's thrilled by the chariot races, something she's wanted to see for a long time. Hercules says he just guessed she'd like it, and she happily agrees, saying everyone enjoys it. Karolina says chariot racing is a test of trust between rider and horse, a fierce battle of horse against horse and person against person in a thrilling race for speed, and she's sure everyone loves it. With enthusiasm, he adds that Red Comet Chanotis Quadriga is especially impressive, a hugely popular jockey who's racked up many wins since his debut, and Hercules simply replies that he understands. After the race, all of the drivers say goodbye to the crowd, and Karolina sighs, saying that today's race has come to an end. Suddenly, the musicians start blowing their trumpets. She turns around and sees her father raising a handkerchief high before solemnly lowering it. Suddenly, riders burst back into the arena at a wild speed, and Karolina watches in shock. She doesn't understand what's happening. It turns out they've decided to hold 2 races, even though she was sure there was only 1 gate. Hercules explains that new gates were added during the stadium renovation, and Karolina listens with admiration. He explains that the stadium suffered for a long time from financial troubles and lack of maintenance, so they decided to rebuild it according to a new design. Hercules smugly says that rebuilding was cheaper than repairing, but she cuts him off, shouting for him to look ahead. There's the red comet Chanotis. Hercules stays silent, while she can't believe she's seeing him in person. He quietly thinks he should probably know a bit more about his own achievements. Looking at happy Karolina, he smiles too, thinking that's a good thing. They leave the stadium. Karolina happily jumps up and says it was amazing, hardly believing he agreed to it at the last minute. For her, the red comet truly lived up to its name. Hercules, pretending to be sad, notes that she has completely forgotten about him. In the middle of their conversation, she bows and apologizes, saying she's truly sorry. As Hercules walks by, he says he knows it's late, but asks if she'd like to take a walk to the last spot. She follows him and asks where exactly. With a sly smile, he replies that they're going to the sea, and Karolina's face darkens. Hercules doesn't understand the reaction. Isn't this a classic spot for walks and dates? She says she's never heard of it. For her, the sea is the endpoint of all Lemuria's sewage, a smelly, dirty, and disgusting place. Hercules understands that dating spots are chosen differently in her world, but he smiles and says it's okay, while she keeps refusing. He insists, gently pushing her and saying everything is fine. She resists, but when they reach the sea, he asks her to open her eyes. She looks down at the endless sea sparkling under the sun's rays and stands still, filled with awe. Looking around in surprise, he says there's no trash here. The water is clean and doesn't smell. The harbor used to be full of fish waste, but now it's crystal clear. And Hercules says it's all thanks to the law. In the past, all the waste and garbage from New Lemuria were dumped into the sea, making the harbor terribly dirty and sometimes causing epidemics. That's why he built this structure to solve the problem, he says, pointing to the building and explaining that it's a treatment plant. It filters all the wastewater from New Lemuria through a series of filters before releasing it into the sea. Now there's a law against littering, and to tackle cleanup, he plans to create a new role responsible for collection and disposal, and move all the dumps far away from the capital. Karolina says she can't believe he put in so much effort and even created a law for cleaning up trash. Is it really that necessary? Hercules replies, yes it is. He pulls her close and kisses her on the forehead. Smiling, he says that if he's going on a date with someone he likes, the streets should be clean too. She blushes and feels a warm rush. He reaches for her neck, fastens the necklace, and says the blue stone looks stunning against her fiery hair. Karolina, surprised, recognizes it as the same necklace, and he replies that he noticed she liked it. Hercules says the accessory suits her perfectly. She pauses for a moment, then smiles warmly and thanks him, and they stand still for a long time, as if he's waiting for something. After a pause, he honestly says he wants her to do something too. She feels awkward, but he explains he's asking her to kiss him on the cheek as a sign of thanks. Hercules adds that he worked tirelessly, and thanks to his efforts, this sea became so beautiful. He reminds her that she said she would do anything he asked, watching her reaction closely. He starts to hesitate. He didn't want to ask for too much, but was it too soon to expect a kiss from Karolina? She shyly leans in, kisses him on the cheek, and tells him he did a great job. Hercules starts to blush. She steps aside. He thanks her. Then a demoness appears, joking about how hot it's gotten. Hercules angrily tells her to shut up, and Karolina doesn't understand why he's reacting that way. Meanwhile, someone in the castle notices that he's nowhere to be seen today, and another replies that he's on a date with Lady Karolina, leaving the uncle and the priest surprised. The priest quietly says it's good to be interested in a girl, and Christopher feels embarrassed by his words. The uncle notes that Dai, who at first was lazy and unmotivated, has been working tirelessly lately, so taking a break is perfectly normal. He probably just needed some rest. He says with tension, while reviewing the documents, that a war might break out soon. Everyone is panicking. Strange activity has been spotted on the Personia Peninsula. There's no proof yet, but we can't just leave things as they are. We need to act to prevent things from getting worse and talk everything through. The uncle says they should go to him, but Christopher grumbles that he'll just get in the way, calling him a know-it-all. When they enter, they see an unexpected scene. Hercules is lying down with his head on Karolina's lap, reading a book, and she asks if it wouldn't be more comfortable to sit up. Seeing her father, Karolina gets scared, and they both shout in shock while Hercules stays calm. After a brief discussion, Hercules, still sitting on her lap, asks if they really want to expand the troops. One suggests starting with the navy, while another advises strengthening the army. They glare fiercely at each other. Hercules boldly tells Karolina that these old folks scare him, and she reassures him she'll stay by his side. He stands up and explains that most of last year's extra profits went to government projects. Irrigation of lands, restoration of military roads, aqueducts, and medical advancements. Without strengthening the foundation of the state, expanding the army will be pointless. He adds that the morale of the people must stay high, and early this year, he planned to increase the military budget. The people need to be ready to defend their country. Hercules assures that he has everything figured out. However, he admits the army is too weak and chaotic to be reorganized, leaving his listeners pale. He says that despite the peace treaty between the races, it's possible to gradually raise funds independently. He understands the need to strengthen the army, but right now it's incredibly weak. The uncle adds that suspicious movements were spotted on the outskirts, and Hercules asks if it's about the Personia Peninsula already starting to suspect. Suspicious and unregistered guild operations involving wheat and iron have been confirmed, and traders are also reporting an unusual increase in the number of mercenaries. After observing all these changes, Hercules realized they all came from one source: the Personia Peninsula. He says that those from Personia probably think that as long as a child sits on the throne, they can easily be destroyed, unaware of the internal conflicts. Leaning back on the couch, he says it's clear they'll be attacked sooner or later, so expanding such a weak army now is just a waste of money. He sighs deeply, admitting how complicated everything is, while Karolina listens carefully and promises that if the Lemuria Empire's army grows stronger, she will definitely reward him. Then Hercules stands up firmly, orders Galphus and Christopher to take action, and immediately calls a strategic council. Christopher silently marvels at how simple it all is, while Galphus listens approvingly, thinking this is just like his daughter. Hercules announces that after the financial reform, they have some extra funds available. Currently, the Lemurian Empire's army consists of about 20,000 heavy cavalry and longbow archers, along with roughly 100 warships. He says it's time to start thinking about the war to reclaim the lands lost under the previous rule. Hercules asks Galphus how many reinforcements are needed, and he replies that while the cavalry is enough for now, he still doesn't feel at ease. He adds that at least 10,000 infantry soldiers are needed, preferably 20, but Hercules cuts in, saying they can't ask for more because the budget won't allow it. Galphus, looking grim, sees the situation as hopeless, while Hercules turns to Christopher and asks about the fleet. He says the state of the naval forces is satisfactory, but many ships are worn out and need rebuilding. He says that cutting military spending will actually strengthen control over the sea, and Hercules asks if he means maintaining the status quo. Galphus reminds that there haven't been any naval battles for nearly 20 years, so now an army is what's needed. But Christopher objects angrily. He shouts that losing control of the sea means they can't protect the capital, and insists the navy must come first. But Galphus refuses, demanding the army be strengthened instead, and refusing to feed parasites. Hercules understands that both sides have valid points. The troops really do need more care and funding, and the Empire's forces are split into two parts. The army is led by Galphus, the fleet by Christopher. Previously, Lemuria had a standing infantry force of 100,000, with cavalry supplemented by recruits or mercenaries from allied tribes. The main army was well-trained and quick to adapt to any battlefield, helping the empire expand its territories. But under Adrien III's rule, its numbers significantly declined. He disbanded most of the infantry and formed a force of heavy cavalry and archers, who were less flexible but highly effective in battle. Hercules admits that it was a wise decision back then, as these warriors partly replaced the cavalry units, with half the army made up of peasants and the other half mercenaries from allied tribes. With poorly armed fighters who had only held plows until yesterday, victory was impossible. Adrien III kept losing men, and battle after battle was lost. Funds were wasted on expensive horses and armor, and soon the empire found itself in a deep financial crisis. This is exactly what led to the current difficult situation, causing Galfus and Christopher to constantly argue. Karolina asks if it's so hard to form the main army, why not hire mercenaries? Hercules thinks it over and decides that dealing with them won't be easy either. He explains that mercenaries fight only for money, and even the Spanish Habsburgs, despite having colonies and silver mines, drained their budget maintaining elite troops. Due to the lack of a regular army, many of them betrayed their cause, leaving behind a bitter lesson, and Niccolò Machiavelli warned that foreign mercenaries cannot be trusted. Hercules recalls that Tertia managed to move from mercenaries to a regular army, unlike the French reinforcements who betrayed Machiavelli. At the same time, he recalls the example of Swiss mercenaries who fought to the death for France, showing that history has many different cases, so it's impossible to generalize the danger. He reflects that Machiavelli made mercenaries face many hardships, and much of his theory was driven by personal reasons, as he himself lacked military talent. Hercules sums it up. Given the army's weakness, hiring mercenaries will only make things worse. We need to focus on strengthening our own forces, and Galfus agrees. He adds that most of the mercenaries from the fleet can't even ride horses, which annoys Christopher. She replies that their ships are in terrible shape after being mistreated by the soldiers, and now they'll have to be rebuilt. They start arguing and yelling at each other again. Hercules sternly warns that if they don't stop immediately, he, as emperor, will order them to kiss. Everyone instantly falls silent and takes their seats. Hercules smiles and says that's great, calling them obedient boys. He adds that abandoning the fleet is not an option. Once control is lost, it's hard to regain. So speeding up shipbuilding is crucial. Christopher thanks him. Continuing, Hercules says he can't add another 10,000 horsemen, but can find about 3,000 soldiers, and asks Galfus if that will be enough. He says the problem lies in the 30,000-strong force of junior officers in the regular army, and asks if that's normal. The answer is yes, because there's always a certain number of junior commanders. Hercules says he'll leave it to Galfus then, and Galfus obediently replies that everything will be just as he wishes. Christopher suggests dealing with those guys from Personia, and Galfus adds that they're quite troublesome. 8 years ago, the Personia mercenary corps rebelled against the emperor and looted the peninsula. They knew the ruler relied too much on slow, heavy cavalry, and wouldn't hold up against light infantry, so they'd likely use the same tactics. Karolina asks if this really means they will invade again, and Hercules replies that no, they probably just want to make the young emperor suffer and loot the treasury. It seems they themselves are struggling financially, and Hercules has heard that the farmers of the Personia Peninsula are suffering greatly from toxic substances. Christopher and Galfus are starting to realize who the real enemy is, and Hercules says it seems like there's one person behind it all. Meanwhile, in the castle, as the maid is cleaning, a beast man with ears enters, sees her, and growls. He grabs her suddenly, freezing her with fear, and tells her there's nothing to be afraid of because he is the master of this place. Elsewhere, the same man asks his subordinate how many soldiers they have gathered. Toei explains that besides the 10,000 mercenaries, 5,000 infantry and 5,000 crossbowmen, they have gathered 30,000 infantry and 5,000 light cavalry from various tribes. Hugging the girl, the man says that this means a total of 45,000 fighters and smiles with satisfaction, thinking it's a pretty good result. Meanwhile, Hercules explains that the mercenary leader of Personia is a black panther named Dalios. A priestess carrying a stack of documents walks through the castle, peeks outside, and sees Karolina and Hercules training. She notes that they fight with full force every time she looks at them. Christopher hands Hercules the documents, explaining they show the army's formation status and shipbuilding schedule, and asks when the war will begin. Hercules replies that with the influx of wheat and iron in Personia, they will soon take action. The soldiers are already gathering, but preparing for war will take a lot of time. He says their soldiers are well trained, but they need to rebuild the ships and gather as many troops as possible, making sure everything is fully prepared. After the strategic meeting ended, all the soldiers and craftsmen of Lemurian Fortress received their orders and immediately got to work. Ships are quickly setting sail from the harbor, and Christopher has reported that they've gathered all the galleys and are carefully inspecting everything. He points to one of the ships, noting that the sailing vessels are too slow, so they need to reduce weight and increase speed, since in battle the ship will be loaded with armor and weapons, requiring all resources to be mobilized. Moreover, the rowers on the starboard side are working much harder than the others, causing the ship to veer and risk crashing into an allied vessel. This must be fixed immediately, and the crew promptly follows orders. Training is in full swing on the parade ground. The warriors take turns fighting, while Galfus irritably asks if they're really scared of something like this. Furious, he shouts that they shouldn't even dream of defending the Empire with such forces, because their enemy is barbarians who have taken their lands, so they have no right to tremble or retreat. He asks you to imagine yourself as an enemy general and attack him with the intent to kill, promising that no one will go home until they win. Ahead lies a war to reclaim the lands lost to Persona, and everyone is giving their all in the preparations. To boost the warrior's spirit and strength, Hercules trains alongside Karolina. They face off in a duel, and Hercules notes that he expected such skill from the daughter of a noble knightly family. Finding no weakness in her defense, he declares Karolina the supreme knight. Karolina swings her sword sharply, forcing it to bounce back, and notes that such a move won't make her lose focus. She points her blade at him and says a knight must always stay calm, because losing composure can cost you your life. He smiles in agreement, knowing she is the daughter of Gallianos Galfus. Then he asks, "How about this?" and suddenly pushes off the wall, using his innate magic and enhanced strength. Karolina blocks the sword strike, fear flashing in her eyes. With one powerful swing, Hercules shatters her weapon to pieces and smiles, asking what she'll do now. During the attack, Karolina uses her innate magic, super speed, suddenly appearing right in front of Hercules, grabbing his clothes and sharply pulling him down. She opens her eyes and groans in pain, while Karolina tells him not to be so sure just because he broke her sword. He smiles awkwardly, admits defeat a few times, suggests calling it a day, and says she's out of his league. She denies it, exclaiming that it's not true and that he was great too, believing he definitely has a talent for fencing. He says he's only capable of being an ordinary person and doesn't believe he can become any better. Karolina notes that if Kelly uses the bond with the spirit she has a contract with, even she won't be able to stand against him. Elves have 3 unique abilities: witchcraft, magic, and spiritual arts. Witchcraft is a gift that allows a deep understanding of the world and the power to influence its very fabric, highly valued in medicine, manufacturing, and during sieges. It was thanks to witchcraft that the treatment facilities were built in such a short time. Magic might seem like witchcraft, but it's different. Unlike witchcraft, which relies on calculations and chance, magic can be used freely in battle. No matter how much you study and train, not everyone is compatible with magic. Magic is divided into 3 main types. Innate, which you're born with, like Karolina's super speed that greatly enhances her body movements. Blood magic is a rare gift passed down through family lines, and the Gallianos are masters of it. Anything they hold turns into a weapon of the highest caliber. Inherited magic is passed down through generations, like the magic of the Lemurian emperors, which marks the rightful heir to the throne. Using it, Hercules can gain a psychological edge over other elves, which is especially important when negotiating with nobles about financial reforms. And finally, spiritual magic is the ability to make deals with spirits to gain their help. Spirits are the will and power of nature, and through a contract, a person can harness their strength. Anyone who has made a contract can do this, so they are very valuable. For example, spirits that predict the weather are especially important in rural areas. But using the spirit's power comes at a cost, and every time you call on them, you have to pay a price. His contract includes a source of magical energy, and Hercules tells Karolina that his spirit won't be much help in battle. He smiles and asks if it really matters, feeling relieved that Karolina is unharmed, while she wants to object. Hercules, smiling, suggests they head back to the room, and before she can ask if he needs help getting up, he suddenly pulls her close. She lunges at him, and he happily notices she's let her guard down. The girl panics and tries to break free. She says she thought the workout was already over, and he asks why she's blushing so much. He wonders if it's time for her to use her super speed, but Karolina replies that in this position he'd just fly away, and she doesn't want that. Hercules asks if she's trying to look calm and jokingly pretends his arms are tired after training, starting to fall, and she asks him to stop because it's not fair. He smiles, thinking how easily she gets flustered, and gently brushes her hair back, moving her bangs aside. She closes her eyes, her cheeks flush even redder, and her lips tremble, while Hercules looks at her in surprise. His eyes fall on the pendant. She still wears the gift he once gave her. He takes her hands and leans in to touch her lips. Suddenly, the priestess's voice rings out, teasingly calling it carefree youth. Annoyed, Hercules asks what she wants, and she laughs, apologizes, and says Titus is calling him. Titus, Hercules' brother, sits in the workshop grumbling that everything is too complicated. He taps on the sculpture, annoyed that he's been waiting for his younger brother for 10 minutes, and demands more respect. Addressing him, Titus says he can't focus on work while waiting, and points out that while he's busy creating masterpieces, Hercules is just flirting with girls. He angrily exclaims that it would be a big mistake to think he works like everyone else, while Hercules, covering his ears, admits he's at fault. Hercules recalls reserving a good spot for him at the next exhibition, making Titus's ears twitch instantly. Titus instantly changes his tone, calling him a mighty and wonderful younger brother, while Hercules wonders to himself how such a simpleton can exist in the world. Titus offers to make coffee and asks him to sit down, but stops him, forbidding him from sitting in one particular chair. He explains that this is the cursed chair once used by an executed serial killer, and that anyone who sits in it will be killed by his restless spirit. Titus proudly adds that it caused the deaths of over 50 people. Hercules suggests hanging it from the ceiling instead of meetings, and Titus gladly agrees, deciding to put it on display. Although Titus was the second son of the Adrien family, and his brother became emperor, their bond remained strong thanks to their shared passion for the arts. Hercules asks how Adrien is doing, and Titus replies that he still keeps to himself because he can't accept not getting the crown. Hercules jokes about giving up the crown, but Titus warns that doing so would lead to the kingdom's downfall. Hercules wonders if he even needs the crown, and asks them not to joke about it. Titus reminds us that Hercules created an art gallery museum and opened a coffee shop that boosts energy for a few hours, so he simply doesn't have enough time for an empire. He excitedly shares that after finishing the sculpture, he plans to paint a few pictures and then create decorations for a concert, wishing he had more hands and dreaming of cloning himself. Hercules says he feels like a Houston, but noticing the confusion, he asks to forget it since it was just a thought spoken aloud. He admits he hoped Adrien would take the throne before they drifted apart, wishes him a good day, but only gets an angry look in return. Titus admits he can't handle this problem because, as his father's first son, he was raised poorly. He serves coffee to Hercules and adds that even if he cares, he won't be able to solve the problem. Hercules had two older brothers, the second son Titus and the third Adrien, who shared his father's name and would have become Adrien IV if he had ascended the throne. Titus says his father wanted to make his firstborn the heir, maybe even gave him a name hoping to fulfill his dream. But there was a flaw in the way he showed love. Adrien's father spoiled him, and as a result, he became selfish and withdrew from society. As everyone knows, Hercules never used his strength for good. He cruelly attacked the children of neighboring nobles, while his father bowed to the victims and their families each time to cover it up, just to keep his path to the throne clear. Titus says that Adrien once tore his painting to shreds. Hercules guesses they must have fought, but he's told they never actually argued. Trembling with anger, Titus recalls arguing with his father, who warned him not to paint in front of Adrien, and that day he first heard the word groundless. Hercules looks at him and thinks he looks like a corpse. Titus blames his father for shaping his character. He hoped it would change over time, but it never did. 14 years ago, Adrien attacked 4 noble children, sparking outrage throughout the entire empire. Adrien stayed calm, believing his father would handle everything, but in the end, he gave up. Titus asks Hercules if he knows that their father was terribly obsessed with his own ideas, and if that's really true. He recalls how, after that incident, his father approached him for the first time, looked at his scribble, said that Titus was worthless too, and never came back. And Hercules asks if that's when he started hating his father. Titus says the first son is useless, just like the second. Amid war and political chaos, when the father was backed into a corner, another son was born. And that son was Hercules. Born at the perfect time, he handled everything brilliantly from childhood and became a true miracle for his father. Since then, all their father's love went to him, and Adrien was forgotten, which sparked the older brother's hatred. Titus sums it up as a happy ending, but Hercules protests, saying there's no happiness here, just one big problem. Hercules adds that their father is terrible at raising kids, but Titus disagrees, saying he's proof their dad succeeded by avoiding all the mistakes he made with his first 2 sons. Aristocrats from royal families are true masterpieces shaped by the hard lessons of past generations. If such perfection came instantly, no one would suffer, and financial crises might be avoided. Moreover, my father managed to build social infrastructure like a wastewater treatment system. Hercules sips his coffee thanks Titus and looks away. Titus wonders when they'll get rid of Adrien, since no one knows when his power-hungry older brother will strike, but Hercules says he has no plans to do that, and won't bother him as long as he stays quiet. Surprised by why Titus is so worried, Titus asks if he truly believes his brother will stay idle, and whether it would be a problem if he contacts the non-elf nobility. Hercules falls silent, then says that Titus knows nothing about politics and asks what he thinks they'll do next. He thinks out loud that starting a rebellion is impossible because the movement of goods and people is tracked by the guilds, and an attack is out of the question since no assassin could get past Karolina's guards. He adds with a suspicious smile that even if the attempt had happened, the criminal would have been easily caught or killed for many reasons, and Titus asks who else is worried if Hercules is saying such scary things. Hercules remembers Karolina and asks Titus if he finished the task he was given, and Titus recalls it too, saying that's exactly why he called him. He pulls it closer and sets the suitcase in front of him. Hercules opens it with curiosity and smiles as he sees what's inside. He praises the work, saying he expected nothing less from him. Titus is happy to hear this and asks where he got the design. He says he followed the measurements exactly as instructed and asks if everything looks okay, to which Hercules replies that everything looks great. Titus asks if he was supposed to give this to Miss Karolina after the successful military reform, but he hears it won't happen until the matter is fully settled. There's a knock at the door, and Titus lets in the guests, Christopher and Galphus, who apologize for the disturbance. Galphus reports that the training of an additional 30,000 infantrymen and junior officers is approved, while Christopher adds that the Navy has also been restored to its full strength with the maximum number of ships in service. Titus tries to figure out what it means, but Hercules stands up and says they will take back the Personia Peninsula, and that's when the war will begin. Personia was once land owned by the Lemuria Empire, which mainly earned income from exporting grapes, olives, and marble, but that clearly wasn't enough to support around 10,000 mercenaries. 8 years ago, when His Highness Hercules was just 4, mercenaries stormed in because his predecessor, Adrien III, stopped paying the agreed wages. To crush the rebellion, he personally led the troops and started a war, but suffered a crushing defeat against the army led by Dalios, and peace was only achieved at the cost of losing the Personia Peninsula. Since then, Personia has effectively become an independent state ruled by mercenaries. That evening in the harbor of Personia, peace fills the air as people talk, laugh, and drink, enjoying the quiet night, and one of them happily remarks what a wonderful night it is. But his words are cut off by a cough. He chokes on his drink as sharp sounds from the streets signal an invasion. In a panic, everyone is shouting at each other to take their seats quickly. It's time to get ready. Stepping outside and looking toward the sea, they are horrified to see a vast fleet of ships rapidly approaching the shore, closing ranks side by side. Meanwhile, in Personia itself, tyranny reigns. Exhausted residents sit on the streets begging soldiers for mercy, but Dalios's troops harshly push them away. In front of Dalios's castle stands a beautifully set table with stewed meat, rolls, and appetizers. Reading the appeal, he learns about the request to lower taxes and coldly remarks that there are too many poor people in this country. He mockingly adds that even after freeing Lemuria from control, they squandered all the money anyway, and arrogantly asks what they would have done without him. Tossing the paper aside, he picks up his drink again. He says with pleasure that at least the wine here is good, and the food is better than in Lemuria. A subordinate reports spotting movement of the Lemurian Empire's troops, likely preparing to invade, while Dalius just smiles, saying he already knew that. When asked if he really wants to be the first to attack Lemuria, he replies that they have nothing to fear. He dismissively explains that their enemy is a 15-year-old boy who has never known war and is the son of His Highness Adrien III, confident that the boy will either pray to the gods or come up with some equally ridiculous plan to win. With a sly smile, he adds that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree and asks how they plan to make sure this first war stays etched in his memory forever. Suddenly, a soldier breaks off and shouts bad news. Enraged, Dalios grabs him by the head and slams it against the table. He ominously says that the other person disturbed his peaceful meal by barging in without permission. A trembling, bleeding soldier apologizes and reports that the Imperial army has already entered their territory. Everyone present exchanges stunned glances, and Dalios freezes for a moment. Then he explodes, demanding an explanation. The soldiers say the enemy plans a surprise attack, but Dalios cuts them off roughly, saying he already knows and asks where the invasion began. The response came from the bay, confirming that the harbor of Personia had fallen under the pressure of the Lemurian army. Dalios starts trembling with rage, sighs, and calls Hercules a rat. He realizes that the man knew there were no ships in Personia and deliberately chose the sea route. If even one vessel had been there, the landing could have been delayed. The subordinates suggest calling in the troops immediately, but he cuts them off sharply again, saying it's clear even without them. He thinks the enemy can now only move in 2 directions, either toward the fortress where he is or toward the capital. He's now in the fortress, but reaching it means a long trek in heavy armor that will tire the soldiers, and since he thinks more strategically than Adrien III, He's sure Hercules won't make such mistakes during a surprise attack. If someone wants to save time and resources, Dalios predicts they'll just head straight to the capital. With a confident smile, he adds that they're being too naive. After all, thousands of trained infantry and 2,000 archers have been raised here since childhood, all protected by a tall wall that, in his opinion, won't fall so easily. He says we need to counterattack the enemy right at the wall. Once they stop, the battle will be won with almost no losses. At that moment, a frightened soldier calls for the commander. With a trembling voice, he announces that the capital's wall has fallen. The enemy has broken through the defenses. Dalios and his men freeze in shock. He asks in horror if he heard correctly, as Lemuria shouldn't have such a strong army here given their perfect military training. The soldier explains it coincided with a rebellion in the capital, but Dalios can't believe this is happening now, and wonders how it's even possible. He thinks hard about what might have gone wrong and concludes that there are traitors among them. The streets are in chaos as people riot and attack soldiers. From the crowd, they shout to get out of this country. They won't let themselves be killed by taxes while others feast on their money. They demand an end to the pointless resistance before the Imperial army completely crushes them. Someone yells at another to be quiet. It's better to give these lands to Lemuria than live like this. While soldiers bark at the crowd to calm down immediately. Suddenly, one of the soldiers stabs his commander. It turns out to be his own subordinate. He is supported by others who kill the commander, and then he orders all the castle gates to be opened so the Imperial army can enter. Hercules watches from afar, laughing, sure that this panther once told him about the apple and the apple tree. He asks with a smirk what it feels like to be hit right in the heart. While Christopher and Galphus Galionis exchange glances, thinking he's clearly full of himself. Karolina Galionis tells His Highness Hercules that the invasion went surprisingly smoothly, and asks how he managed it, to which he proudly replies that it was very simple. He gestures with money and says, "With this." Karolina looks doubtful, not sure that money alone will solve everything. He explains that Dalios hired mercenaries raised in harsh conditions from childhood, who are fiercely loyal to him, and would fight relentlessly for revenge in open battle. But there weren't enough loyal warriors to guard all the cities, so Dalios also hired foreign mercenaries. Hercules convinced them by offering twice the pay, knowing about these plans 3 months in advance. Galphus Galionis looks at him and calls him a bribe-taker, adding that after this, loyalty is out of the question, while Hercules simply reminds him not to trust mercenaries. When he sent a few bribed mercenaries into the city, they helped him stir up a rebellion among the residents. Karolina asks how they ever expected to count on the townsfolk's support, and Christopher explains that people had been fed up with Dalios's tyranny from the start, with their anger growing stronger every day. Galphus adds that while the rebellion could have been sparked by those loyal mercenaries, it would have taken a lot of time, but now the gates are already open. Hercules says the success of this operation was clear even 4 months ago. He approaches his comrades, says they're ready, and suggests meeting Dalios on the best battlefield. Galphus looks at him expectantly. Hercules asks if he wanted to say something, but confused, he replies no. Lowering his head, after a pause, he says that this is Hercules' first time leading a war. Until now, his orders were flawless, but this success borders on a miracle, and he believes it's best to hold the advantageous position. Hercules laughs and asks if the Imperial army general really expects to defend himself right in front of his daughter, and if he's acting like a coward. Embarrassed, Galphus hears Hercules' confident words that they have every chance to win. He reminds us that the Personia Peninsula was part of the Empire just 8 years ago, and according to merchants, its geography has barely changed since then. Galphus suspiciously asks if these merchants might also have been bribed by Dalios, and Hercules assures him that he has checked everything thoroughly. Suddenly, he unrolls a scroll and reveals a map of the Personia Peninsula. He found the map after falling asleep in the castle library, and after comparing it with the merchant's information, he was sure everything matched almost perfectly. Pointing to the map, he says that the day after tomorrow, Dalios will try to retake the city and suggests starting with an archer attack from the hill by the river, so they only need to cover the front and rear. Galionis orders Galphus to give the soldiers time to dig trenches and strengthen their defenses. This will be enough to make up for the shortage of troops. Hercules reassures Galphus that he's nothing like his father, leaving Galphus looking surprised. Hercules recalls how, at 4 years old, his father first took him to the battlefield, already wearing heavy armor back then. He says that after losing many battles, he learned various ways to retreat and witnessed arguments between himself and his father. He adds that Dalios is a terrible leader, yet he has defeated the Empire twice in a row, but he can't win on his own. Hercules says he'll listen to Galphus's opinion, discuss everything with him, and then choose a strategy, inviting him to witness the victory together. Galphus looks at him for a long moment, then kneels down, bows his head, and says he's proud of the man he's become. He swears he'll give this victory to His Highness Hercules, no matter the cost. Hercules says he's counting on him, calling him a blazing fire, and Galphus nods, showing he understands. Later, Hercules sits by the window, reflecting that the lightning-fast attack on the bay and the capture of the capital, as Galphus said, are unfolding like clockwork. He assumes Dalios has been in a panic for several days. The infantry will need 2 days to reach the northern city, so all preparations must be completed within that time. Meanwhile, Christopher is holding the bay's defense. The war will start in 2 days, and their doubled army will have the advantage. Then a she-demon approaches him and asks if he's awake and needs help, but he replies coldly that he doesn't. Meanwhile, in Personia, frightened soldiers prepare to defend themselves, while Dalios, riding ahead, orders them to move faster. He's done dancing to Lemuria's tune. In his fury, he keeps saying that Hercules underestimated him and swears to kill him. Hercules is tense, wondering what move Dalios will make next. He recalls the rule of the triple attack. To break through a defense, attackers need to outnumber defenders 3 to 1. While defense is often safer, attacking offers more options in timing and location, so the initiative usually lies with the attackers. Hercules says they will attack strategically, defend tactically, and win. That's how their battle will unfold. Karolina Galleonis asks if that means the enemy will gain the initiative, and he replies that on the battlefield, either side can take it. He explains that it's hard to say for sure. They're not just defending, but they're also not rushing to attack. Instead, he'll let the enemy make the first move. Dalios, driven by fear, made the townspeople hate him. And when the mercenaries realize the war is lost and no help is coming, they'll scatter into the desert. Karolina asks why they would act that way. Wouldn't it be easier to unite around their leader? Hercules replies that for mercenaries, war is just business. They can't be so devoted that they fight without any chance of winning. He pats her on the head and says that in the end, money rules everything, so you can't trust it. It explains that pledging loyalty to your homeland and being ready to die for it is completely different from a mercenary army. He thinks Dalios wants to defeat him as quickly as possible without caring about losing respect, so their tactic is to make him rush. Here, a spiritual beast with a bulging eye reports that the enemy has been spotted. Troops from the Personia army are advancing from the front. Hercules asks about their numbers, and the soldier replies that, according to the eye, there are about 40,000. The other warriors cheer loudly as the enemy finally appears, calling them damn traitors. Galphus Galleonis points at something ahead. Hercules also spots the panther flag and sees Dalios charging fiercely on horseback from afar. He has informed them there are about 28,000 foreign mercenaries on the front lines. On the flanks, there are about 5,000 light cavalry of various races, while the rear is protected by 4,000 well-trained infantry and 3,000 crossbowmen. Hercules realizes this information matches what he got from the bribed mercenaries and starts assessing his own strength. 8,000 heavy cavalry, 15,000 infantry, and 5,000 archers, 28,000 fighters in total. He notes that although they are barely equal in number to the enemy infantry, they have the advantage of fortifications made of stakes and trenches. If the enemy tries to cross the river on foot, they'll be hit by a storm of arrows, like a heavy downpour during a thunderstorm. Dalios will probably try to break through, and Hercules doesn't believe he'll choose anything other than a direct attack. If that happens, the true strength of their opponents will decide everything. Hercules addresses the army, declaring that today they will make history in Lemuria, and after this battle, the empire will rise again. He shouts that they will reclaim their lands and Personia, and the army erupts in cheers of support. Dalios glares at him with hatred, calls him a petty fool, and vows to make him regret it. Swinging his sword, he orders his troops to attack, and Hercules is immediately informed that the enemy is advancing. Hercules orders all the archers to aim and fire, and thousands of arrows soar into the sky at once. The soldiers call upon the spirits of the wind, asking them to guide the flow and make it dance among the arrows. The spirits guide the arrows perfectly, sending them straight into the enemy's faces. Dalios laughs, recognizing the move, and mocks them for turning their defense into a long-range attack. Elves, known for their archery skills, can shoot up to 10 arrows per minute, so with 5,000 archers, that's 50,000 arrows every minute. He thinks their archers may not be as powerful, but when thousands of arrows fly at faces and exposed body parts, that's 500 wounded in a minute, 1,000 in 2, and 5,000 killed or incapacitated in 10 minutes. And this is even without fatal injuries. This is enough to break their fighting spirit. He sees the wounded retreating and begging for help because they don't want to die. Arrows strike them in the eyes, and the soldiers fall dead. Filled with rage, Dalios wonders if there are really cowards among them and shouts, asking what they're even doing. He says he won't let his money go to waste while the soldiers look at him in horror. One, trembling, grabs his weapon, hesitates, but then returns to the fight, followed by the others. Hercules sees a small group breaking through and says that those running will die anyway. He admits the enemy is holding stronger than he expected. If this continues, they'll reach his archers. So he pauses and calls for Galphus Galleonos. A massive Galphus in heavy armor appears, asking if his time has come, and Hercules replies that it has. He orders him to lead the heavy cavalry unit and charge into battle. The soldiers nearby hear the order and ask to wait, since it's nearly impossible to get the heavy cavalry armor through the ditches. It just seems like a pointless move. Galphus Galleonos says he understands and asks if Hercules really meant that. Hercules confirms, but the others don't understand what's going on. Hercules asks how much distance is needed, and as Galphus mounts his horse, he says 10 meters will do. Surprised, Hercules asks if he's sure. She just smiles and asks who he thinks he is, then tugs on the leash. The horse neighs as Galphus urges the others to hold on tight and never stop, promising to show the results of their training and spread the song of victory across all of Lemuria. He orders Karolina Galleonos to follow him and cover their rear. She obeys and sets off after him. They shout at the soldiers to clear the way. The cavalry is charging. Hercules watches from afar, counting the moments. Dalius's soldiers don't believe they're really going to break through the trenches. Some say they're overestimating the power of horses and armor. Dalius realizes the trap and shouts for his warriors to retreat, while the mercenaries are left confused, not understanding what's happening. When Hercules counts to 10, he orders the spirit Modius to lift the illusion. The demoness obeys and dispels the spells. The motes before them vanish instantly, leaving the soldiers frozen in amazement. Galphus explains to Karolina that Hercules has removed the spirit's illusory device, and she nods, accepting the order. Karolina shouts that she'll tear all the enemies to pieces, while Galphus promises to burn them with just his voice. She summons the spirit of Eligas, who in turn calls forth the spirit of Amma. Karolina suddenly speeds up and breaks through the enemy lines, with Galphus chasing after her, surrounded by flames. Soldiers burn on the spot as Karolina rushes through, cutting down enemies with her sword, while both of them attack Dalios from opposite sides. Hercules commands them to move forward, and Karolina and Galphus join forces in a united battle formation. Hercules' warriors charge forward fiercely. Archers unleash their arrows, and Galphus relentlessly smashes everything in his path. Karolina, following her father, strikes down those left with her sword and shouts to herself to keep moving forward. Dalios realizes his plans are falling apart. Who would have thought he'd so cleverly hide his attack route using his own inventions? He starts to doubt if Hercules is really that fool's son. How can a hawk be born from a snake? Dalios smiles ominously and says it's going to be interesting, then orders the sergeant to change the strategy, which he immediately does. Suddenly, all of Dalios' soldiers start retreating, and Galphus has no idea what's going on. Hercules is puzzled too. The enemy has stopped fighting and scattered. Why are they doing this? He watches closely and begins to understand, quietly whispering, "Wait." Frightened, Karolina tells her father that the enemy's behavior is strange, and he agrees, urging her to stay alert. Suddenly, an arrow strikes the soldier right in the eye, and Galphus and Karolina turn around in horror. Warriors fall from their horses one by one, while Dalios' soldiers stand ready, aiming their spears and crossbows straight at them. Hercules watches in horror as Dalios orders the crossbowmen to step forward. The volley begins, arrows strike the horses, they fall, but the warriors keep moving forward. As soon as the warrior falls, enemies rush in and stab him with their spears, tearing a scream of horror and pain from his chest. The other fighters keep moving forward, but they're surrounded and spears pierce their bodies. Dalios yells to attack, while Hercules' soldiers vow the enemy won't get through and tense up, readying their arrows. Enemy mercenaries quickly wipe out the front archers. Karolina Galleonos panics, and Galphus says things are bad. They're being pushed back. The sergeant reports to Hercules that the first and third squads have been wiped out. The infantry is still holding but won't last long and asks for orders. Only silence answers. The sergeant calls out in despair once more, but Hercules remains deep in thought. Finally, he says he understands the enemy's plan. They want to destroy them with heavy cavalry. Hercules explains. Dalius split the central infantry, spread them out to the sides, then sent in the crossbowmen and spearmen. He blocks the cavalry's advance, worn out from constant maneuvers, and stops them with a wall of spirits. Even if they manage to break through the ranks, the light cavalry would quickly surround the phalanxes and reformed infantry, trapping them. Dalios, watching from afar, realizes just as he thought Hercules has no backup plan. Hercules says that's exactly how he fights, while the sergeant can't understand why he's so calm in such a critical moment. He sees Hercules smiling, looking pleased, and says that Dalios' plan isn't bad. Hercules asks the colonel to bring him a horse, confidently declaring that this battle will be his victory. Meanwhile, Karolina fights the spear wielders, breathing hard and covered in sweat, still in the saddle. She knows the situation is tough, but her father is counting on her. The horse is exhausted, yet she must find a way through. Suddenly, the crossbowman fires, and the bolt strikes the horse right in the head, causing it to shudder and fall to the ground along with its rider. Enemies stand before her, spears pointed right at her face. She knows this is the end. Soldiers are discussing how much they'll get for the enemy commander's head. One argues that she's just a child. Another says she's the daughter of the famous Galphus Firestorm and worth a great price, while someone else suggests putting the captive up for auction. Another agrees and calls for the commander, but in a flash, Karolina, filled with rage, beheads one of them. She yells that she won't let anyone ruin Hercules' plans over such a careless conversation. She charges into battle once again, while behind her, Hercules rushes forward, commanding everyone to follow him, and the warriors obediently spring into action, descending the hill. Dalios laughs, thinking he's decided to die along with his army. Lemuria has only about 10,000 warriors. Adding a few more won't change anything. But as he looks closer, he freezes and then turns pale with horror. In front of him is a field full of soldiers, and he has no idea what's happening. His soldiers scream in fear that they never signed up for this and start to run away. A huge horde is charging at them. Dalios calls his men fools and orders them to turn back, saying it's just a spirit's illusion. No one listens. He yells that Lemuria can't have that many warriors, but the soldiers keep fleeing, and Dalios grits his teeth in anger. The sword slips from his hands as he lowers his head. Karolina notices the enemy retreating and turns toward Hercules' voice. He reaches out his hand. She hesitates but takes it, and he pulls her close, seating her beside him on the horse. She starts to apologize, but he interrupts her, saying she fought brilliantly for her first fight. She lifts her head and asks if she can ask a question, while Hercules listens carefully. She wonders why he hid the fact that Lemuria had so many warriors, since the battle could have ended differently if they had fought with full force from the start. Hercules smiles, thinking they might be mercenaries he bribed, while Karolina watches closely and sees the warriors simply vanish. The entire army suddenly vanishes into thin air, and the girl realizes it was all just an illusion. A demoness appears before them, saying such a sight deserves a reward. Hercules replies that he knows and orders her to disappear, to which she smiles ominously and promises to return later. Hercules explains to Karolina that defeating 40,000 enemies one by one is too difficult, but when they lose the will to fight after seeing such an illusion, victory is guaranteed. He adds that after such a blow, Dalios won't be able to organize a defense, and the outcome of the battle is clear. Hercules calls out to Galphus Galionis that it's time to retreat, and Galphus hands Caroline over to his care. But he adds that a little more remains, and his eyes blaze with fury and a thirst for blood. Hercules turns away with Karolina, saying he understands him but asks him not to go too far. Galphus nods, and his body bursts into flames. Soldiers surround Dalios, pointing their swords at him. Thus, the first war led by Hercules as the Emperor of Lemuria ends in a complete victory. The Lemurian army suffered minimal losses, while Personia completely lost its mercenary infantry. After the battle, the cleanup begins. The wounded are treated, weapons gathered, tents set up, and soldiers eat a hot meal. Hercules is writing a letter in the big tent when Galphus Galionis enters, saying they've brought a prisoner. Dalios walks away with his head held high, followed by Karolina, with Galphus leading the way. Hercules said he thought Dalios would last longer, but he's just too quiet. Dalios replies that after such a crushing defeat, the remnants of his army will no longer follow him. Neither loyalty nor authority holds them anymore. He openly admits he underestimated Hercules and asks for forgiveness for his past arrogance. Galphus angrily asks how he dares speak that way while tied up, and Hercules laughs, agreeing that this time the victory is his. She asks what would happen if they met on the plain. Dalios confidently claims he would win. Galphus grows even angrier, but Hercules sides with his enemy, shocking Karolina and Galphus. He adds that since their first encounter, he has learned a lot, and has already surpassed his predecessor. Hercules reminds that Dalios promised to admit his guilt and asks if he's ready to hear the terms of peace. Dalios offers to give up all the lands but asks for the lives of his closest allies, whom he has raised since childhood, to be spared. Galphus is stunned, and Hercules is surprised. Galphus is upset, wondering if he realizes the chaos they could cause, and Hercules suggests sending them away. Dalios replies that only they stayed with him until the end, and the rest of the troops can be dealt with however they want, whether handed over to the crowd or avenged for the previous emperor. Hercules stands up and agrees to save his people, but says he has one condition, while Karolina and Galphus shout his name in protest. He says the damage done to the empire and its reputation is immeasurable, and not even the head of Dalios can make amends for it. Dalios bows his head and asks what he will do next, while Hercules just smiles. Hercules tells Dalios that he will become his vassal, which catches him completely off guard, while Galphus and Karolina watch in horror. They both shout, asking if he's lost his mind, and Dalios laughs, saying he knew Hercules was unusual, but not that much. He asks if the man really wants to make him a vassal of the one who stained his father's name in history. Hercules smiles and asks if that seems so strange. He adds that his predecessor only suffered defeats and Lemuria lost all its strength, so why not hire an experienced warrior for the job? Especially now, only Galphus can command 10,000 troops, which isn't enough. The army lacks the skills to fight the mercenaries, so he wants to learn from him, and is even willing to pay the reward that the previous person took. Dalios turns away and says he's a mercenary who can stab you in the back, and Hercules replies that he's completely serious. Dalios asks what will happen if he refuses, and Hercules is initially surprised. Then he suddenly laughs out loud, making Galphus and Karolina jump. He said he offered a great place in the sun, but seeing how disgusted he was at the idea of being someone's dog, he understood everything. Smiling, he repeats the words about an arrow in the back, and the Imperial blood magic awakens within him. Hercules lifts his head and asks who he's talking to right now. Suddenly, Dalios starts to tense up and struggle for breath, while Galphus and Karolina freeze, too afraid to move. Dalios can't understand this incredible magic. He can't breathe and his mind races. How does this guy have so much power? Is this his spell? Karolina falls to her knees, gasping for air, her eyes slowly closing. Hercules catches her, apologizing, while Galphus barely holds onto the table, struggling to breathe. Dalios steps back sharply, breathing heavily, his face filled with fear. Hercules says he won't drive his people out of the land. He'll give them land they'll have to work for their whole lives. He smiles and asks if he understands what that means. Dalios realizes that the moment he decided to attack was the exact moment the collar appeared around his neck. Hercules placed his hands on his shoulders and said that from today onward, he looked forward to working together. Dalios looks at him with a mix of horror and strange admiration, unable to believe this is the son of that fool, Adrien III. Rumors of Personia's defeat are spreading through the great castle. An announcement is to be made tomorrow, and preparations for a feast are underway. Prince Adrien, brother of Titus and Hercules, hears the news, smashes everything around him, and screams in rage. The servant warns that he will be heard, but he can't believe that such a small country could win. He declares fiercely that he alone deserves to be emperor, clutching a black cloak in his hands. Meanwhile, the people of Lemuria celebrate the return of their emperor as they see a crowd of warriors led by Hercules at the gates. Amidst thunderous applause, he returns triumphantly as the townspeople cheer his name. They travel across the entire empire to cheers of joy. Galphus with Christopher, and Hercules alongside Karolina. They arrive at the castle, where Kroll, Lucana, and His Highness Titus are waiting for them in the courtyard. Hercules asks if anything happened while he was away, and Lucan replies that everyone has been working tirelessly. She adds that she has already heard about his victories in Personia and is incredibly happy. Hercules proudly says they won, which boosts his reputation. Suddenly, he stops and looks around carefully, and someone asks him what's going on. He asks Titus where Adrien is and hears an apology that he couldn't make it on such an important day. Hercules knows Adrien doesn't like being in the spotlight and respects his choice. Lucana approaches Galphus Galleonis, saying she heard about his great performance, but when she sees Dalios instead, she screams and recoils. Galphus asks if Dalios has decided to ignore Hercules' amnesty, and Christopher suggests drowning him in the Sea of Lemurs. Lucanus asks Hercules what he's doing here, since he was supposed to be executed publicly. Hercules says you can consider him a war trophy and adds that he will be your vassal, which scares Lucan even more. Titus notes that Dalios has great muscles, and Dalios reacts as if he's ready to jump into action. Lucana asks Hercules if he's sure about his decision, then reminds him that the important thing is the war ended in victory. She has prepared a place for them at the banquet and invites them inside, leaving Hercules surprised. Kroll thinks that after a long journey, Hercules should take a rest since there are no urgent matters to attend to. Hercules, with a sly smile, thinks to himself that he's completely free today. Titus says this is their first win in a long time, and promises to prepare the best wine for him, and Galphus thanks him. Titus says he'll definitely write a heroic tale about him and asks for all the details at the banquet, but Hercules disappears instantly. Titus asks where he has gone. Lucan is surprised since he was just here, and Galphus looks around and notices Karolina is missing too. He panics, asking if anyone has seen her, while Titus understands and guesses that he went after the reward. Karolina, feeling shy, tells Hercules that this is the first time she's worn such an outfit. She asks if it suits her to hide her face, and Hercules gladly says it fits perfectly. Karolina, dressed as a maid, covers her knees and says in a trembling voice that she's glad to hear that. She tries to lower the hem of her dress to hide her legs, but Hercules tells her she looks wonderful. The girl feels a chill and asks for permission to change her clothes. Hercules sternly calls her by name and reminds her that he has already explained, making her blush even more. Clearly embarrassed, she says that yes, she is a humble servant of the master and will serve him. Hercules says with satisfaction that she's doing well, even though she doesn't quite understand how things turned out this way. She joked about a reward if the Lemurian army proved themselves, but never expected Titus to come up with a uniform like that. She feels like her skirt lifts with every little move, and she's terribly embarrassed. Hercules suggests starting with some tea. Karolina asks which type of tea he would like. He replies that it's black and asks if she sees the red can at the very top. She replies that everything will be done and goes to get a ladder, but Hercules asks her to wait, saying the ladder is not allowed. He orders to retrieve the jar on their own, without using any magic. Karolina reaches shakily for the jar of tea with one hand, holding her skirt with the other, groaning with effort. She knows she can't reach it that way, and if she lets go of the hem, the inevitable will happen. Hercules tells her to take her hand off his skirt, and blushing with embarrassment, she obeys. As she keeps stretching, she tells herself there's just a little left, and her skirt is already rising. She wonders how a proud knight of the Lemur army could stand before the emperor looking like this, and all she wishes is that he wouldn't look. He's watching closely, waiting just a moment longer, and she realizes he's doing it on purpose. Hercules asks if such a simple task is taking too long, and she hesitantly says she can't reach. He suggests she just jump since she's an elf. He asks if she's willing to disobey just because there's a risk her skirt might ride up, saying he prepared her finest outfit so she could appear in all her glory. Is that really all her loyalty to the emperor amounts to? Karolina agrees with the thought, realizing he rushed into battle risking his life for her while she hesitates over something so small. Summoning her strength, she jumps high to reach the jar, determined to repay the favor. The curtain rises to reveal everything. Upon landing, she apologizes and promises to make some tea. Seeing Hercules turn away, she tries to thank Titus but suddenly realizes with horror what has happened. She makes tea, pouting, and says they need to wait a bit for it to brew. Hercules notices her anger, but she still calls him sir. He gently calls her by name and asks her to come closer to make peace. She hesitates but then walks around the table. Hercules pats his knees and invites her to sit. She protests that it's heavy, but he smiles and says it's in order. She sits down, avoiding his gaze, and he wonders why she wasn't shy during training, but now insists this isn't a workout. He suddenly hugs her and says she's so sweet, but she snaps back that cheap flattery won't get her forgiveness. He apologizes sincerely, admitting that he overdid it. Karolina asks if something is bothering him, and he admits it is. He spent his whole life following in his father's footsteps, and now, for the first time, he's leading troops into battle himself. It's a huge burden. It is said that the common people closely watch the emperor, and political and financial matters, along with infrastructure development, forced him to win this war to earn their trust. Thanks to the victory, there will be fewer unhappy people, like a weight lifted off our shoulders, and Caroline was saved. She says he now needs to show up at the banquet looking heroic in front of Kristoff and the officials. He was told to show his strength and courage just like on the battlefield when he fearlessly rushed to her side. Hercules looks at her in surprise while she blushes and apologizes, saying she probably should have called him emperor instead of saying too much. He starts playing with her cheeks. She doesn't understand and asks what he's doing, but he doesn't answer. Hercules says she's right. If he does that, Kristoff won't complain. He asks if she can stay on as his maid for a little while longer. She smiles brightly, gently strokes his hand and gladly agrees. Their lips meet in a loving kiss. Hercules and Karolina arrive at the celebration. Christopher points to where Dalios and Galphus Galleonis are showing off their muscles, while behind them the skinny Kral stands awkwardly. His Highness Titus captures the scene in a drawing, showing Hercules in the center pointing at Christopher, who refuses to pose and tries to escape. Galphus placed a hand on Christopher's shoulder, making him flinch, while Galeos glared at Galphus with anger. His Highness Titus keeps adding new characters to the canvas, while Hercules watches on, looking pleased. Hercules raises his glass before hundreds of guests in the hall. Everyone joins in singing, and Karolina watches him with joy. Late at night, while Hercules is asleep, a demoness appears through an opening and calls out to him. He wakes up to find her sitting on him, hearing her say the night is wonderful, and she tells him she's here to fulfill the contract. Hercules fully wakes up and happily says, "So it's you," to which the demoness replies, "You're finally awake." She smiles faintly and says she called him many times and even thought he was dead. Hercules asks what she means, since they are currently in her dream, and she confirms, adding that a contract is a contract. As always, she gets what she wants, pressing her lips to his, but Hercules doesn't respond. Her name is Asmodea, and only he can see her. She's his contracted spirit, once a cherub. But she fell, giving in to the deadly sin of lust, and now she has become a demon. Among 72 pillars, she ranks 32nd and holds the title of queen. Anyone who makes a deal with her gains a huge advantage, but in return, she drains their mana and physical strength. Though Hercules doesn't mind, he trembles and groans, while the demoness consumes everything, and he begs not to be driven to death. She says she's just getting started. Ordinary men don't survive meeting her, but he kept his spirit strong, and when he asks since when, she replies, since the moment he became untouchable. 5 years ago, a priest told young Hercules that he had done an excellent job and had a bright future ahead. 10-year-old Hercules replied that anyone in his family could do it. All it took was visiting the library once a day. Lucanos wanted to say that the other emperors would have failed, but she changed her mind. Hercules feels like this happens every day and he's already tired, when suddenly he gets a headache and Lucanos gets scared. He doesn't understand these visions, places that don't exist in any country or book. Could it be that they're not from this world at all? He knows for sure these aren't his memories. Lucanos asks if he's okay and offers to call a doctor. He refuses, but she points out he looks pale, which irritates him and makes him shout. She says she'll rest and that everything will pass, but asks not to tell anyone. She agrees. He finishes the session and hears Lucanos say she'll call the maid if anything is needed. Focusing his thoughts, he sees a man's portrait. He doesn't recognize who it is when he hears knocking at the door. He asks them to leave, but the knocking doesn't stop. He opens the door and sees Medea smiling broadly at him. He doesn't realize she's new and snaps angrily, asking if no one taught her manners, not to knock so insistently. She retorts indignantly that apparently that's his way of saying hello. She smiles and admits she probably didn't pick the best outfit, quickly changes from the maid's costume into a long robe, and asks if that's better, leaving Hercules stunned. He slams the door shut, trying to drive the demoness away, confused because he recognizes the clothes from his memories. Who is she? Suddenly, he flinches at her laughter. She appears above him and says she always loves seeing people's surprised faces. Hercules doesn't understand how she's doing it, and she replies that it seems he still remembers everything, leaving him frozen and confused. He asks her directly what she means, and she says she knows who he really is, because this question has been haunting him for a long time. She reassures him that these memories are not his own. He explains that the man and his past are from another world and have nothing to do with him. Hercules assumes they're talking about another kingdom, but she insists it's a different planet and a different time dimension. He asks how she knows, and she admits that she was the one who planted those memories in him. He gasps in shock, clutching his throat and asking how, while she thinks he doesn't remember it anymore. She explains that even before he was born, she planted the memories of that person to see who would win. The humble soul lost to his proud and ambitious one, so the soul vanished, but the experience remained. He assures that now he is truly himself, and that soul no longer poses a threat. Hercules listens calmly to his words. He asks to wait and says something is bothering him. Why him, of all people? She smiles. Centuries ago, there was a man who united Lemuria and founded a monarchy. It was her former master, whose ideas amazed her, and she couldn't let his empire fall. That man could have died, but his knowledge and wisdom were priceless. He could have been Lemuria's salvation and hope, so she used him. Now the important thing is to sign the contract. She flies in close. Hercules doesn't understand what contract she's talking about. She apologizes for not introducing herself. It is said that among the 72 great pillar spirits, she ranks 32nd and holds the title of queen. Her name is Asmodea. Hercules realizes this is one of humanity's greatest evils, and making a deal with it would be his end. He yanks at the door in frustration, but it won't budge. He shouts, calls for security and Lucanos, but no one shows up. The demoness's hands reach out toward him. She pins him to the floor and explains that they are dreaming, and no one will come in the real world. He resists, but she takes action, saying his innocence will come at a cost, and his essence will be the seal. He promises to make a man out of him, but he's outraged. Who would ever agree to that? She laughs with delight, saying it's wonderful. She loves cheerful people and wonders how long he can keep it up. Hercules barely remembers what happened next. He wakes up to find himself in bed, with morning light streaming in. He remembers everything. Beside him lies a demoness embracing him. She says that after the contract, he became her perfect plaything. He asks her to stop, but the feeling of insects crawling in his stomach won't go away. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the village, a man sits alone when a cloaked figure approaches him. He immediately asks about the product. The first man says he has it but wants payment up front, so the other hands over a heavy wallet. After getting the money, he hands back the package and wishes good luck. What happens next is none of his business. As he walks away, the man in the cloak examines the small potion in his palm and whispers that it's all for the Empire. Meanwhile, the palace is celebrating victory with great fanfare, while shortly after, Prince Adrien sneaks quietly down a dark corridor. He reaches the main hall where the Emperor's crown rests on a velvet cushion and mutters mockingly, "Hercules an emperor? What nonsense." Adrien says the guy is getting arrogant by calling him younger, then turns to his 3 henchmen and asks if the Empire needs him, to which they silently agree. The prince irritably adds that his father chose him first, reaching out to take the crown. Suddenly, he hears Lucanos's voice sternly reminding him that touching is forbidden. Adrien steps back, feigning calm. He glares angrily at Lucanos, blaming her for getting in the way once again. She explains that this crown is a great relic of the Lemur Empire, passed down honestly through generations, and only the Archbishop and the Emperor are allowed to touch it. Adrien starts shouting that his father chose him, and how dare she boss around the Emperor's son. Lucanos admits he's right. The Emperor did plan to make him his heir if he saw fit. But he warns that if he ever tries to touch the crown again, he won't receive the church's prayers for rest. The prince trembles with anger, swearing he'll remember this, then abruptly turns and walks away with his men. Priests whisper behind her back that he simply ran away, and anyone who doesn't receive a prayer for rest is considered a sinner. Clearly he will fall away. Lucanos thinks he should stay alert because trouble might still come his way. At this moment, a feast is underway in the castle, with tables overflowing with dishes, soups, pizza, fish, and meat, while Hercules and Karolina look on eagerly. The chef proudly says he made the best dishes: Palazzo Margherita pizza, caprese with calzone and tomato sauce, all featuring the Emperor's favorite tomatoes. Karolina notes that it looks incredibly delicious. Hercules takes a big bite of the pizza, and the chef asks how he likes it. The toy replies that it tastes even better than before, and the chef, delighted, says it's music to his ears, and he'll cook so well that the Emperor will cry with happiness. After cutting costs on infrastructure and palace maintenance, he redirected the funds to other needs. Only the freshest ingredients from across the empire are used in the kitchen, and the best chefs, invited by his father, prepare the meals. That's why these dishes are the best in the world, though there are some details to consider. Hercules sighs, tired of them, and the cook turns pale, asking if something's wrong, but Hercules denies it. He explains that at first he loved these tomatoes, pizzas, and soups, but the taste barely changed, and he simply got tired of them. The cook sadly asks if he wants to try something else, while Hercules reflects, lost in memories of the past. He says he wants to try curry. The chef repeats the name in surprise and starts to prepare it, but Hercules stops him. He explains that curry is a general term for a dish that can include many spices and be prepared by stewing, frying, or even with fruit. The main spices are cumin, coriander, cardamom, turmeric, chili, allspice, and sometimes black or cayenne pepper. Karolina says with surprise that she didn't know about this kind of food, while the chef thoughtfully mumbles that all these spices are quite spicy. If he knows all the ingredients, we can try making it, but judging by his expression, recreating the recipe from memory won't be easy. Hercules tells the chef that spices can be found beyond the empire, and soon after, he introduces a new chef named Knala, who politely greets everyone. The first cook tenses up and asks what this servant is doing here, and Hercules reminds him he wanted to try curry, since almost all the spices come from the land of Knala, so he brought their cook along. Knala admits he used to be a servant, but the Church of Messi converted him, and now he's free. The head chef just nods, as if to say, "Got it." Knala shakes the chef's hand and says she's glad to meet him, calling him chef, which surprises him with her politeness. Hercules tells them to get to work, but the head chef stops him. He says that as the head of the kitchen serving the Palace of Lima, he takes pride in his role and can't just let anyone into his sacred space. He asks for permission to first test Knala's skills before making a decision, and Hercules agrees, acknowledging he's right. To do this, he gathers a few people around the table to run a test. Hercules proudly announces that everything is ready, and he has gathered the best judges for the future palace. Now it's time for the tasting. Alongside him, there are 7 judges who must satisfy everyone's tastes, and for formality, Nal has already been appointed as the court chef. Hercules himself is curious about the taste of curry, as he has never tried it. Galphus recalls tasting dishes from the Sondilians. Christopher mentions visiting Sondila with the previous emperor, and Lucanos points out that for a simple bishop, food with many spices is an unaffordable luxury. Dalios grumbles fiercely, warning them not to dare slip in anything nasty, still not understanding why he's even here. Knala apologizes for the delay, and brings 1 large cake and 3 small bowls. He presents chicken curry with butter, spinach curry, kamuli curry, and tandoori chicken. Galphus eagerly notes the wonderful aroma, while Christopher nostalgically says it takes him back to earlier times. Karolina looks at the food with appetite, while Dalios, like a cat, thinks the dish is too hot. The cook watches quietly as Lucat shouts and suggests starting by giving thanks to the Lord. Lucanos says a prayer, thanking the Almighty for the food and asking for blessings to strengthen both body and spirit. Hercules claps his hands happily and says it's time to eat. then tears off a piece of flatbread and dips it into the curry. He slowly brings it to his mouth and chews carefully, while Panther Dalios and Karolina watch his reaction closely. Kanala asks how it tastes, and Hercules smiles, saying it's delicious, inviting everyone else to try it too. One has spinach, another kamuli, and the third with tandoori chicken. In just half an hour, almost nothing is left. Karolina happily says it's incredibly delicious. Gulfus praises the vibrant flavor, and Christopher dreamily adds that it's true Sondilian cuisine. Lucanos eats carefully, knowing it's a sin not to taste such a treat, while Kragola asks Dalios why he isn't eating, and he replies that he's waiting for it to cool down. Kanala smiles warmly and chats with everyone, while the head chef realizes with a mix of despair and surprise that his kitchen has been appreciated. He hesitates, looks at the dishes, thinking he won't like the taste of unfamiliar food since he doesn't like spicy, but he takes a piece, dips it in curry, and tries it. His eyes widen at the unexpected taste. Hercules says he's pleasantly surprised because he thought the dish would be much spicier. Nala apologizes and explains she was cooking using her own recipe, leaving Hercules even more surprised. He explains that in his country it's very hot, and people cool off by sweating a lot after eating spicy food, so curries there are usually very hot. But not knowing how locals feel about spicy food, he added apples and honey. Karolina notes she personally prefers a slightly sweeter taste, but the dish still turned out great. Kanala happily says that even here people know the cuisine of his homeland, and he's glad to see the satisfied faces of those who taste his dishes. The poor first cook recalls his journey, how they called him a worthless fool and doomed him to peeling potatoes for life, while he secretly read cookbooks, hurt but determined. He sadly thinks that one day he will cook a delicious meal for the emperor himself. Hercules raises his hand to signal it's time for the verdict, and asks everyone to raise their hands if they'd like to try Kanala's dishes again. Galfus raises his hand, saying he'd like a sharper taste, and Christopher and Lucanos agree. Karolina says she'd prefer something a bit sweeter, and Dalios the Panther agrees, adding that everything is already great. Hercules says he's also curious to try a spicier version or dishes with new ingredients. He turns to the boss with a question, and after a moment's thought, the boss raises his hand too. The cook says that to prepare food closer to the Lemurians' tastes, he needs to stop grumbling about everything, and Kanala thanks him happily. The chef jokingly grumbles and asks to be warned if such a big pot is needed. The other apologizes, explaining the dough was for tandoori, while Hercules smiles at their argument and asks Nal to bring more. He asks if anyone wants seconds. Karolina asks for tandoori chicken. Galfus wants the same plus kimuli. Christopher chooses spinach. Lucanos silently asks God for forgiveness, and Dalios, without looking up from his plate, mumbles that it's really delicious. The chef stands up and says he'll make them desserts, and as he leaves the kitchen, he admits that looking at Kanala involuntarily reminds him of his past. He stops by his country's emblem, realizing he's probably holding on too tightly to an old defeat, and has forgotten the most important thing, the smiles of the people. He cheerfully says that after the spicy food, he'll prepare refreshing fruit desserts. He senses someone behind him and quickly turns around, while Hercules, rubbing his belly, says he hasn't eaten this well in a long time. The chef returns with a tray, apologizes for the wait, and announces that the desserts are ready, making Hercules happy. He brings some sliced melon and apologizes again. Hercules tastes it and enjoys the sweet flavor. With a smile, he says that such a pleasant sweetness is the best thing after curry, and thinks the melon is simply wonderful. Karolina beams, enjoying his delight. Kanala is handing out melon to everyone, and they all enjoy it, except for the Panther Dalios, who is eyeing the fruit with suspicion. Hercules reaches for the last piece but notices something strange, liquid gathering under the fruit. He suddenly yells for everyone to stop eating. The people present look up in fear as he tries to make himself vomit. Karolina rushes to help, but the Panther Dalios pulls her back and strikes her in the stomach. Christopher and Lucanos are terrified, and Karolina starts vomiting, barely able to stand. Galfus lunges at this panther, shouting in disbelief that it dares to act this way. But Hercules stops him, saying the melon is poisoned. Everyone is horrified, asking if His Highness was poisoned, but others quickly hush them, reminding that speaking about it aloud is forbidden. Someone said they heard there's poison in his favorite fruit, the melon, and they're wondering how he's feeling and who did it. A woman rushes forward, but her servant asks the princess to stop and inquires where she's going. She replies that she's heading to Hercules because she needs to talk to him. The servant says she can't allow it because the previous emperor forbade her from doing so. Evdokia, mother of both Adrien and Hercules, says that Hercules is the country's future and most importantly her son, so of course she will be worried. She is deeply upset and can't understand how this happened, pleading with the Lord to help her son. Lucanos checks Hercules, says his temperature and pulse are normal with no issues, and Hercules replies he's lucky he didn't bite into the poisoned part. Christopher wonders who would have thought the melon would be poisoned. Hercules suggests they made tiny holes to inject a precise dose of poison, and if they hadn't noticed the reaction with the silver tray, he'd already be in a coffin. He turns to the panther Dalios, thanking him, and saying it's all thanks to him, to which Dalios replies that he just noticed some rust on his plate. He nods toward Karolina, suggesting someone near her might have slipped the poison, and Karolina just sighs, saying she has nothing to say in response. Galphus apologizes to Hercules, explaining he was shaken when their old enemy hit his daughter, and Hercules says he understands. Galphus thanks the panther Dalius for saving his daughter, but the panther just turns away and grumbles quietly. Hercules glanced at the boss and asked if he really meant to kill him. The cook looks up at the ceiling in panic, insisting he cooked with all his heart, and would never dream of poisoning his own creation, especially the Emperor's. Then Hercules asks where he got the melon. The boss gets tense but admits that she was brought by His Highness Adrien's assistant, Mr. Domenico. He explains that he met him in the hallway on his way to the kitchen, and he said it was in honor of His Highness's victory. Galphus notes that he seems to be from an aristocratic family close to Adrien's, and 4 years ago, when the land tax was raised, he took out his anger on everyone. Christopher adds that since then, Domenico has sided with Adrien, so such behavior is quite possible. Lucanos tenses up, then tells Hercules this could be proof, mentioning the crown. Everyone was shocked and asked if he tried to touch the crown, since that's a crime, which is why he wasn't at the banquet. Lucanos asks if they'll be looking for Domenico, but Hercules says it's pointless since he handles fruit import and export, and even questioning him won't help. The boss pleads that he didn't know about the poison and asks to be believed, while Paula supports him, saying he's a good person and even shook his hand. Hercules replies irritably that he knows the cook was just used, but until all doubts are cleared, he forbids him from entering the kitchen, and Kanala's face instantly darkens. The guards escort the boss out, followed by Kanalu, while Hercules turns to Karolina, who also ate the poisoned melon, telling her to rest and asking why she's even here. She says she can't go to sleep when Hercules' life is in danger, and shouts that she has to be there right now to protect him. Suddenly he pulls her closer, lays her down beside him on the bed, and covers her with a blanket, making her blush. She wants to back away, but the panther Dalios flinches warily as the door suddenly swings open, and a woman enters the room, apologizing in advance. She approaches nervously and asks how he's feeling. Galphus recognizes Mary, and Karolina flinches when she sees her mother. Mary is Galphus's wife and Karolina's mother. Galphus is furious, reminding her he told her not to come, but she says she was worried. Hercules reassures her there's nothing to worry about, while Karolina worries that her mother might have noticed her lying in Hercules' bed. Mary takes Hercules by the hand and apologizes that her husband and daughter were helpless when it mattered most. She asks if she can help, and Hercules says to thank the panther Dalius, who was the one who saved her daughter. She approaches, bows deeply to the panther, and expresses sincere gratitude. The panther turns away again, snorting. Then she takes his hand and marvels at his muscles, saying they're just like her husband's, while Panther Dalios has no idea what she wants. Mary turns to Hercules and asks if he's hungry, offering him bean and garlic soup, and he agrees. Lucanos says it's a great idea since garlic can neutralize poison and suggests eating more of it soon. Hercules is happy and asks Karolina if she'll stay. She shyly says she doesn't like garlic much, and he lifts a spoon, asking her to open her mouth. She tries the soup, thinking that in this situation she physically can't help him, while Mary watches with a sly smile. She quietly approaches Hercules and whispers that Karolina Gallionis is still innocent and untouched, almost making her choke on her food. Mati swears she found time to talk about this because she's worried about her future, as she's only focused on martial arts and ignores everything else, doubting if she'll ever become a wife. And Galphus Gallionis adds that this information is extremely important. Barry Goog calls Karolina incredibly sweet, but she asks him to stop because the Emperor himself is right in front of them. Hercules recalls how, after the incident with his brother over 10 years ago, their father changed the way they were raised and limited their visits with their mother. He forbade them from calling each other mother and son, meeting only out of formality, and this continued even after their father's death. She continued to visit him only as the Emperor, and even when he was ill, she never came to see him. So it's clear she wouldn't come now, but still, he doesn't see it as a reason to be sad. The mother's voice breaks through his thoughts. The servant behind apologizes, saying he tried to stop her, and Hercules turns to her, calling her mom. Christopher reminds his sister, the princess, that such actions are forbidden, but she defies the late emperor's orders. Evdokia tells him to be quiet, while Hercules says he wants to talk to her. He orders everyone to step back from his mother, but she kneels before him, and Hercules thinks that now, after the attempt to poison him, she has come to stand by her son in danger. She says she's here to talk about today and asks if they've found who's responsible. Hercules says he's almost sure his brother is involved but has no proof, and Evdokia lifts her head in horror. He knows that to their mother, they are both her children, but his brother has crossed the line, and even so, she will probably act just like their father once did. Evdokia pleads for mercy for His Highness Adrien, while Hercules, stunned, darkens with understanding of why his mother has come. The audience listens in horror as she defends Adrien, saying he worked hard every day to become who he is, and that she always took care of him. That's exactly what she wanted to say. She believes he acted on impulse without intending harm. And since he's her brother, she asks for mercy on his behalf. Hercules asks again, realizing she never actually came to check on him. She doesn't understand what he's talking about, and he adds that without proof he can't do anything. He tells Evdokia that as emperor he cannot ignore this, so Adrien will face trial. She looks at him in shock, then grabs his clothes, begging him to spare her son. Christopher tries to pull her away, but she stubbornly repeats her plea. She cries out his name in despair, and he promises to do everything he can. Her face freezes into a haunting expression. She stands up, lowers her hands, and quietly says she's thinking about joining a monastery. He asks if she's really decided. She says she will pray for her husband's soul to find peace, for her son's sin, and for her own, since she didn't stop him. And then she places herself in God's hands, leaving everyone present deeply moved by her words. Hercules smiles and says that since she's made up her mind, he won't argue, then asks if she's chosen the monastery, and she replies that she has. After saying goodbye, she steps out and closes the door behind her. A heavy silence falls, and Karolina Galionis quietly calls for Hercules. He orders Galphus and Christopher to call a meeting today, and they obey. Hercules says that Adrien will stand trial. Meanwhile, Adrien, furious, is smashing things with scissors, shouting that his brother should have died quietly. The servant tells him that his mother came by, but Adrien orders her to be sent away, convinced she was trying to make him her vassal again. He's annoyed that his brother is gathering the elders, because if he wins over the aristocrats with sweet talk, it's all over for him. He can already picture how it will unfold. Hercules gathers the people and addresses them as respected parents and future parents, declaring that their country is in danger. He claims that heretics and enemies have already taken their lands, and if it continues, they will lose everything for good. Hercules says they must reclaim the land his grandfather fought for, and now, with a strong army, they have a great chance to win. He clenches his fist, raises it high, and declares the start of the war to reclaim the lands, sparking cheers from the crowd. Hercules tenses up even more as he looks at the portrait of himself and his father, asking why the crown wasn't passed down to him. He sits in despair in an empty room, surrounded by scattered belongings, broken furniture, and torn curtains. On a dark night, Adrien lies in bed and wakes up to a noise. Lifting his head, he sees a shadow and a glimmer in the corner. A bright soul of a girl with short hair appears before him, looking at him with curiosity. Adrien looks at her in shock, and she greets him, asking if the night isn't just wonderful, making him start to blush. He asks her roughly who she is, and the girl smiles, saying she thought people liked that kind of curiosity. Suddenly, she spreads her wings, calling herself an archangel in the first of the pillars, and her name is Jibidi. Adrien is stunned and asks if she's really an archangel, so shocked that he falls out of bed. She laughs and asks if he's seeing an angel for the first time, and he replies that he never imagined they dressed like that. She pulls him close and tells him she has a message from God for him. Jibidi announces that Hercules will soon set out on a journey to the Principality of Trabus. She explains that thanks to his victories and the Panther Dalios' surrender, he gained massive support in the country, and now aims to reclaim all lost lands. She adds that the recent gathering of nobles was held for this very reason, while Adrien complains that Hercules is getting cocky after just one victory. He lifts his head and asks where she got that information, and she replies, it came straight from the source. She says she just overheard their conversation and, as mentioned before, they'll start with the Principality of Trabus. That's what they were planning. Later, Hercules suggests starting with Delios, since it's important for him to hear the analysis from a defeated enemy, and Panther Delios replies that he understands everything. He says he lost because there was no other commander capable of leading a large army. If there were such a thing, we could better allocate our resources and fight back. Panther Dalios adds that he had no choice but to accept the commander, and Hercules asks why. She says she doesn't trust mercenaries because they're easy to bribe and sway, and the Emperor has proven that. Hercules proudly admits she's right. Hercules notes that if the fight took place on the plateau, they would have handled it easily, and Panther Dalios asks who will lead the attack with their weaker forces. Hercules says the main reason for his defeat is the loss of his father's lands. He understands and even supports the reasons behind this action, but stresses that without proper governance afterward, it's pointless. Without the ability to govern a state, expanding your territory is pointless. Panther Dalios looks away in shame. Hercules laughs in agreement but assures that this time he'll do everything right, so Dalios will have to work hard. He says they've heard Panther Dalios' opinion, and now suggests moving on to discuss Lemuria's internal affairs. Galphus Galleonis notes that recalling that battle and Hercules' orders, there are no complaints about the strategy. Hercules says the main issue is weapons. Karolina Galleonis asks for clarification, and he confirms it's about infantry armaments. He explains that during the Battle of Personia, the infantry mostly fought with swords and shields, while one group was armed with long spears. These spears, called sarasses, were used by the Lemurians thousands of years ago. Their 5-meter length made them more effective for cavalry than swords. But the final battle showed it was a mistake. Spears often got stuck in the ground, were awkward in close combat, and disrupted formation, so most warriors dropped them and switched to swords. He emphasizes that their kingdom is surrounded by deserts, plains, and mountains, and their enemies, nomads and mountain tribes, are perfectly adapted to the terrain. If weapons can't be used effectively because of the landscape, it would be a disaster. They can't assign weapons to each type of terrain separately, so it's better to replace the daggers with spears. He suggests building a 7-meter-high weapon to keep enemy cavalry at bay, adding shields for arrow protection. The height offers an advantage, but the weapon must be lightweight, not disrupt formation, and allow carrying a shield, and he asks if anything like this already exists. Everyone sits tensely, unsure of what he means, while Panther Dalios jokes that maybe it's better to use everything at once. Galphus Galleonis says it's easy to talk like that, but impossible to make it happen. And Panther Dalios adds that when the Emperor asks, you just have to find an answer. Hercules comes up with an idea and scares them by saying they'll re-equip the army and start training right up until the performance, while Jabril secretly listens in. In Adrien's room, she explains how they're preparing step by step, while he calls his brother arrogant but doesn't care about soul combat techniques. Jabril says their journey is doomed, and when he asks in surprise what she means, she explains that they will be sailing by sea to the kingdom of Trevisos. But the spirit's wrath will unleash a storm, and they will be lost among the waves until they all drown. Adrien doesn't believe it and asks how that's possible. She explains that in one world, the army of a great kingdom was caught in a similar storm twice, which gave rise to legends about the god of thieves. She adds that Hercules has no idea about this. Right now, he's gathering an army and preparing for a campaign. Adrien thinks for a moment, then says he doesn't care, and Gabriel looks at him in surprise. He says that he was meant to inherit the throne, the country, and its traditions, not anyone else. He admits that he loved his father more than anyone else. But the Emperor's magic left the father and passed to Hercules, who didn't even realize what had happened. Among the heirs, he was the least favored, but the father, the vassals, and even the magic of inheritance chose Hercules. His country, his father, he loved them above all else. Maybe he was a bit more talented, but that one took everything from him. When his mother saw the magical seal, she told him to obey Hercules, but the father, mother, and crown belonged to him. He will kill anyone who took everything and reclaim what's rightfully his. Gabriel smiles and says he's been through a lot, but now the Lord personally protects him. She promises that soon he will take the throne and lead the empire to greatness. She suddenly pulls him close, promising to reward him if it happens. Adrien asks her to wait, but she ignores him and keeps pushing while he shouts, questioning if he can really become emperor. At that moment, he suddenly wakes up, looks around, and realizes it was just a dream. Breathing heavily, he thinks how ridiculous it is. Where would an archangel even come from here? Then he notices a scroll on the bed, unrolls it, and sees a map showing the route to the Principality of Trabzon. He doesn't understand how she ended up here. White feathers fall onto the bed, and he picks one up, studying it carefully. Then he starts laughing, saying that he can finally knock him off the throne. A man comes in, apologizes, and is surprised that Adrien is already awake. It's Dominic, and Adrien says he's right on time. He orders Dominic to gather the troops, and when Dominic asks if this means a tax to fund the army, Adrien replies no, there won't be any tax. Adrien says that Hercules is setting out on a campaign against the Principality of Trabzon, and they plan to attack him as soon as he returns. Dominic asks if this is a coup and why it's happening so suddenly, and Adrien replies that he's finally lucky because now God is on his side. Suddenly, he tears down the curtains, wraps them around himself, and staring fiercely ahead, declares that he will make Hercules taste all the bitterness and filth of his life before killing him. Meanwhile, Hercules orders his men to follow the plan. He tasks them with finishing the final preparations and promises to tell the people that their lost lands will soon be theirs again. Christopher assures him it will be done. Hercules adds that his brother has already tried to kill him once and will most likely try again. Karolina Galleonis squeezes his hand. He looks back, and with fire in her eyes, she promises it won't happen. She smiles faintly, thinking he won't succeed, while he's confident he's in full control. Hercules steps out onto the balcony to face the crowd below, who listen intently to his words. He announces everything with open arms, while Adrien watches him from the window. A few days have passed since Hercules began carrying out his plan. People are saying they never heard anything like this during the Council of Elders, and everything is unfolding just as Archangel Gabriel predicted. Someone points out that it's still unclear. Apparently, this vision was dreamed by His Highness Adrien. Adrien gets annoyed by the title. The guy gets scared and immediately apologizes. Then silence falls. Adrien commands them to listen to him, saying his father should have chosen him instead of Hercules, because he is the god's favorite and the true emperor. He says this message is a reward for all the suffering, a chance given by Archangel Gabriel, and he must not lose it. He keeps saying that if it weren't for his brother, their situation would be better, and the people nervously agree. Next, he addresses the Bulgars, reminding them of their trade issues. The Bulgarians are a nomadic people, mostly of one race, but among them are elves of royal and noble lineage. Their main currency is sheep, and they occasionally suffer from the actions of the Lemurians because Hercules is unhappy with the trade terms. After listening to them, Adrien says he understands them without words and wants to use their wildness in battle. Suddenly, there's a loud knock at the door. Adrien, annoyed, asks what the noise is, and a servant enters with news. He shouts that Hercules and a 40,000-strong army of Lemurians have sunk in the RTLSC. Panic sets in. Did they really die? Everything feels like a vision. Dominic wonders what Adrien will say, and Adrien realizes this was a real message. He turns to his people and tells them they're the best because they didn't listen to his brother's speeches. Believing his time has come, he promises honor and glory to all as his brother falls and he rises. He shouts that he is now the next emperor. Everyone cheers for him, while Adrien believes he can kill Hercules. Using the sea route map, he decides that Hercules will return to this port, and they plan to meet him on a nearby plateau. He plans to knock him off his horse, grab him, tear out his tearful eyes with his own hands, and behead him. Gathering a vast army, he takes pleasure in the thought that Hercules will pay for everything at their father's grave. Standing with his troops, he smiles, wondering if his brother is late, or if his squad is so small it's barely visible. He is informed that Hercules' troops are approaching. Adrien smiles eagerly, thinking this day has finally come, and he is eager to face it himself. He dreams of seeing his brother's smug face. Hercules' troops halt with weapons ready, and from afar Hercules spots Adrien. But Adrien freezes in horror. He can't understand where his brother got such a huge army. The sergeant says he doesn't know. According to reports, most of the soldiers were supposed to stay at the bottom of the sea, and Adrien angrily adds that, according to the prophecy, they shouldn't look so alive and well. He is convinced that the Archangel's words couldn't be wrong. They were meant to sink and bring down the wrath of the sea spirit. He shouts that he'll never believe a picky sea spirit could ever like someone like Hercules. He wonders what they can do in this situation, while Hercules watches from afar, pleased to see they're already getting nervous. He turns to Karolina, asking if she sees it. She hesitantly replies that she'll probably hold back from commenting. A man appears behind her and disdainfully says it's a pitiful sight. Adrien didn't even check the news and believed the army was defeated. This is Edmund, Hercules' half-brother, who adds that it's sad to have such a thoughtless relative who only tarnishes the family name. Hercules laughs and reminds them that he's their mutual brother, then apologizes for being blunt. Edmund is a half-elf from a military family and a half-brother on his father's side. During the war with Panterdalios, he guarded the capital, but this time the duty was given to Galphus Galleonis. Hercules wonders why Adrien is so different from them, even though they grew up in the same environment. Edmund jokes he'll take that as a compliment, and Karolina adds that Titus should be here too. But Titus refused, shouting like a child that he didn't want to go on the trip. They tried to persuade him, stressing that it was Hercules' order as preparations for the campaign were underway. But he was outraged, saying he didn't care about their wars. He was inspired, and if he put down his brush now, he would bring shame to his family. He's nervous and says that if Adrien kills him while he's painting, dying with a brush in hand is every artist's dream, so he's not going anywhere. When the servant tells Hercules this, Karolina notes that he probably won't come after all. Hercules says it's because he's not motivated the right way and asks you to listen carefully to how to get him moving. He suggests to Titus that they do some sketches outdoors, and Titus instantly turns around with fiery eyes, saying he's definitely in. Hercules laughs that he's easy to bribe, while Edmund jokes that he's surrounded by people like that and doesn't know what else to say. Even now, while Hercules is posing as a soldier in the Imperial army, Titus keeps making up nonsense, and Hercules adds that staying in the castle would have made him an easy target for Adrien's men, but this way, he can still be useful. He watches as Adrien tries to make sense of what's happening, thinking the poor guy hasn't noticed a thing. His father often bowed to the nobility to make Adrien emperor, and his mother, defying the ban, also pleaded for him. He understands that Adrien was his parents' favorite, and thinks to himself that he never stole anything from him. Without his own mistakes, Adrien could have become emperor. Now he must take the country his parents loved under his own protection. He orders the cleanup to begin, and Panther Dalios confirms that all the conspirators are already identified. Thanks to this meeting, they will be able to crush Adrien and his followers, rooting out the threat completely. Hercules says that instead of a slow cleanup, it's better to have one big battle to show that it's smarter not to stand against him. Galphus Galionis announces that the recipient has arrived, and Hercules, smiling, takes the scroll from the soldier. He asks about Christopher, who says everything's fine but wishes he could see the nephews fight. Hercules laughs, calls him cautious, and says he's already back at the castle for safety. He adds that they need to wrap things up quickly and come back with trophies and exciting stories. Adrien doesn't understand why Mrs. Jabriel said that to him. Wasn't his army supposed to drown? He recalls Mrs. Jabriel's words that everything is fine and God is on his side. But sweat streams down his face. He doesn't know what to do. He clenches his fist, telling himself this is just a test from the Lord that he must overcome with ease. He asks about the size of their army, and is told they have 18,000 infantry, 2,000 crossbowmen, 2,000 cavalry, plus 8,000 horsemen from Bulgarin as support. So it turns out there are about 30,000 in total. Adrien asks how many soldiers the enemy has. It's believed there are no exact numbers since they're behind the fort's walls, but estimates put the regular army at about 20,000 infantry and 10,000 archers and cavalry, totaling roughly 40,000. Adrien concludes that the difference is 10,000. He joyfully declares that they have every chance to win and is confident they will crush the enemy right here on the plateau. But they ask him to stop and advise avoiding a fight on the plateau. Annoyed, he asks who dared to say that. A man introduces himself as Oscar Alman and asks Adrien to reconsider the situation, and Adrien learns that he is the second son of the younger branch of the Alman family. The Almani have long controlled vast southern lands of Missouri and are the economic backbone of the empire. With such power, the elves envy them, and the Almani feel the same way in return. In the past, these sides have clashed many times in arguments and even fights. Today, the Almani have joined what's called Adrien's faction, but for Oscar, being the prince's advisor isn't exactly a lucky break. Adrien is upset that the advice comes from someone not even from the main family line and without a name, but he adds that it all depends on what is said. Oscar replies that he understands. He explains that both sides have nearly equal forces, but the enemy is led by Galphus Galionis, who personally trains the elite troops and sees the heavy cavalry as the main threat. Their army, on the other hand, is diverse and struggles with coordination, plus the soldiers are wearing new armor they're not yet used to. Adrien says he doesn't see any problems, but Oscar insists it's about more than that and stays silent for a long moment when asked what exactly. Finally, he reminds them that according to Lady Jabriel's prophecy, Hercules' army was doomed to drown, but now they face a well-prepared enemy. He got a bad feeling, like they were being trapped, and said it would be easier to win if they held the fortress instead of fighting on the plateau, asking them to think it over once more. Furious, Adrien grabs him and yells, asking if he really thinks hiding behind walls is the answer. He shouts that he's had enough of his brother's insults and will make him eat dirt even on a clear plateau, while this nameless one has no right to command the emperor. She sharply pushes him away, telling him to go back to his place. Oscar quietly stands up and apologizes, while Adrien shouts that the Lord himself blesses them, so they must not lose their fighting spirit. As he leaves, Oscar thinks Adrien is doomed, and Hercules will definitely win, so he needs to figure out how to get the army out of danger. 3 days have passed since the two armies met. Both sides finished building their fortifications, and during that time, there were no provocations, no shots fired or stones thrown. The war was approaching, but the battlefield fell silent. At the Hercules army's frontline post, Karolina Galionis carefully scans the surroundings, while the Panther Dalios signals with its eye that about 30,000 enemies are nearby. He adds that they are well prepared. Hercules calls it rot, but admits that for aristocrats, raising such an army is no problem. In their empire, not only the emperor has an army, some nobles also command their own soldiers. Compared to other empires, this one is dangerous because even after repelling bandit attacks, the threats never fully go away. Most landowners have their own security, so it's clear why the aristocracy hires mercenaries. Unlike mercenaries like Panther Dalios, aristocrats have long owned lands and estates, with the main branch having their own vassals, branches having theirs, and so on, creating an entire network of subordinates. Hercules realizes that by combining this power, they can create a real army. He sighs and adds that this is exactly why he dislikes aristocrats, because they inherit power through blood ties. They say blood ties are a powerful force, a great strength given from nowhere, and to reject it is like denying a God-given gift. Panther Dalios smiles, reminding Hercules that this applies to him too. And Hercules agrees, yes, that's true. But, he adds, if the blood starts to rot, it will turn into ordinary red water, and the noble blue blood will simply lose its value. He suggests returning these bonds to God right now. Hercules turns to the warriors below, asking if they see things differently, just as representatives of another race appear. Galphus Galionis is puzzled why the Bulgarians aren't enemies and doesn't understand what they're doing here, while Hercules comes down saying he was the one who called them. He explains that Bulgarin's troops are experts in swift strikes, but their advantage fades in open battle. So when they chose to fight openly, it seems strange, and he sent a messenger to them. What they're doing here now, Hercules calls living proof of his suspicions. Then he speaks to the young general in his own language and asks what he has to say. The general is surprised. How does he know her? Hercules replies that if you look hard enough, you can find a personal teacher. She smiles and says that an emperor should be a friend and ally, and knowing the language is a duty. Does he think otherwise? The general approaches and asks if he is really the emperor of Lemuria, surprised by his youthful appearance. Hercules invites him into the tent and tells Galphus Galionis that the rest is up to him. He bows and carries out the order. In the outline, Hercules tells the general that this time he's willing to turn a blind eye to what he sees, and the general doesn't understand until Hercules proposes a deal. The general sits down, looking nervous, and takes the document as Hercules explains that the agreement has 4 key points: mutual peace and a ban on attacks, the opening of official trade routes, the obligation of King Bulgarin to send troops at the request of the Emperor of Lemuria, and an annual tribute from Lemuria to Bulgarin. The general asks what this means. Hercules says they are a nomadic people, and if they keep abandoning farming, life won't get better, since just eating meat won't keep them healthy. To start farming, you need technology, seeds, and more, which you can get either by raiding or trading. This time, they decided to use the fight for the throne to grab everything they needed. But if Adrien doesn't take the throne, did they really think Hercules would compromise with them? They hesitate, but Hercules reminds them they're allies, so they should just chalk it up to a coincidence. They're shaken by how well he anticipates their moves. The frightened general agrees, signs the deal, and announces that Bulgarin is withdrawing from the war. He's scared. Unlike those before him, this young man grips so tightly it feels like he can see right through you. Hercules picks up the document and says they're now bound by an agreement, then orders his Bulgarian friends to disappear, while the general realizes that one wrong move will mean their destruction by Hercules. Adrien, panicked and confused about why the Bulgarian army is retreating, orders that no one dare disobey his command. A soldier approaches him with a message from Bulgarin's envoy. They've made a deal with the Lemurian Empire and are withdrawing from the war. Adrien angrily strikes the soldier, scolding the nomads and shouting that they can't be trusted. He keeps hitting and shouting that everyone is trying to betray him, even though he doesn't understand why. Finally, he calms down, sees the soldier unconscious and struggling to breathe, and starts to smile. He stands up and, with a trembling voice, says everything is fine. Now things are only getting more interesting because God is on his side, and this is just a test before ascending the throne. He whispers to himself that the difference is always 10,000. Just a small detail. Confident in his victory over Hercules, he repeats what Mr. Brio said. The future of Lemuria is in his hands, so defeat is impossible. He shouts excitedly to stop throwing stones and start fighting, just as the soldier rises to his feet. Hercules spots the Bulgarians from afar and notices they seem to have fulfilled part of the agreement. He believes this is a good thing. Unlike the aristocrats' private armies, which are hard to control, Bulgaranu's army is state-run with a clear command structure, so the biggest obstacle has been removed. Hercules draws his sword and declares that it's time to fight. He orders everyone to take their positions. Hercules shouts to destroy the merchants, while Adrien responds by calling to kill the false emperor, claiming God is on his side. The attack begins. Archers and crossbowmen unleash a relentless storm of arrows, filling the sky, while the warriors press forward without pause. The battle rages on as arrows fly in countless streams, with crossbowmen relentlessly firing and calling upon the spirits of the wind, commanding them to dance alongside the arrows. From a distance, Hercules orders the heavy cavalry to advance. A soldier signals, and Karolina Galionis, along with her uncle, charges into the attack. Adrien recognizes the signal, orders his soldiers to part, then crush the enemy cavalry to pieces, and the soldiers obediently advance. One of the warriors steps forward, asking the wind for protection and wishing death upon the false emperor's soldiers standing before him. In a fierce clash, the soldiers call upon the spirits of the wind once again, demanding to show the power of their empire. Galphus Galionis races forward with fire blazing behind him, while enemy soldiers wait in terror for their fate. As he flies by, nothing remains of them but ashes. Galfa laughs, calling them weak. He loudly declares that no one can stand against his mighty stride, while the enemies shout, calling Karolina and Edmund merchants and servants of the fallen emperor. Edmund tells Karolina he'll go first. She asks nervously what he's planning, and he replies that he hasn't been in a fight for a while and wants to warm up, so Karolina steps aside. The warriors charging at them mockingly say the girl is running away, so they'll deal with the old man first and then catch up with her. Edmund looks confidently at his enemies and says it's sad to hear that, as he believes it's wrong to call someone old just because they've lived a little longer than them. The soldiers look at him in surprise, not understanding his words, while Edmund smiles and says he'll start with them. He summons his spirit, Andromelia, and commands her to show these fools their place, and the spirit appears as a woman wearing a hat with patterns on her face. Suddenly, a dark force seizes several warriors, freezing them in place. They don't understand what happened, but in an instant their weapons vanish and they find themselves unable to move. Andromelia has the ability to randomly steal items from people within a certain radius, up to 300 at a time. The enemies still holding their ground realize they can't fight without their spears and helmets, so they demand their gear back. Karolina Gallionis rushes at an unarmed enemy, who nervously begs her to stop, and she summons her spirit, Eligos. With Eligos's help, she takes out a crowd of enemies in one strike, shouting that it hurts her to even look at them. She yells at Edmund that it's her turn now, while he thinks it's great she made a contract with the strongest spirit, Eligos, and he's happy to fight by her side. Suddenly he notices lace lingerie in his hand, glances at Karolina, and falls silent, feeling awkward. She snaps that she'll return it after the fight, since Andromelia usually steals weapons and armor, but sometimes other trophies show up too. Panther Dalios laughs and tells Hercules that his army is incredibly strong, to which Hercules replies that it's the result of many months of hard training. At first, he planned to send halberdiers to the front line, but the enemy put crossbowmen in the vanguard, so even with shields, it wouldn't make sense. Hercules admits he was tempted to try but decided against it, and Panther agrees, calling it a wise choice and adding that there will be plenty more opportunities ahead. He asks where Titus is, and Hercules points in that direction, saying he's over there. Amid the relentless crossbow fire, a massive spirit tiger suddenly appears, charging straight at the enemies, while the soldiers scream in terror, trying to make sense of the monstrous creature. Titus stands beside the warrior, admiring the animal and commanding it to destroy the enemies. Holding a brush with a canvas before him, he happily calls his creation beautiful. Two soldiers shielding him from arrows with their shields urge him to duck, while Titus calmly asks them to keep protecting him. He picks up the brush, calls forth Decamberia, and announces the start of a new masterpiece, while a wondrous flower swirls gracefully in the air beside him. The spirit of Titus Decamber releases the life-giving juices that bring his paintings to life. Everything he paints comes alive. Titus decides the next creature will be a bird. Let it tear apart the traitors with its claws. Thus, the two-headed eagle is born, immediately swooping in for the attack. He shouts for the eagle to fly forward, calling it a magnificent creature, as the bird tears into the enemies with its claws, stopping them from fighting back. Smiling, Titus says he hasn't summoned a spirit in a long time, and though he's tired, bringing these paintings to life is pure bliss. Suddenly, an arrow strikes the eagle's wing, piercing it. Titus lets out an awkward sound, and once again he's advised to hide. The enemies realize the beasts are made of paper. One of them mocks, saying it's no problem since they're just puppets, and Titus overhears this. He bursts out shouting, "Laugh at his art, then may you die!" He quickly starts drawing a whole group of creatures. Panther Dalios watches from a distance and asks if he's okay, and Hercules replies that Titus's spirit is helpful, but can only endure a few paintings. Meanwhile, Adrien, watching everything, calls Hercules a fake emperor and can't understand how he dares to win. He decides that Edmund is no threat, but Karolina Gallionis is a problem, and asks to kill at least Titus, since he's already exhausted and can't use his spirit. He shouts that the crossbowmen won't hold out much longer and orders everyone to charge, his command echoing across the battlefield. Hercules, noticing this, orders immediate action. He orders Titus to be taken to the fortress, while the crossbowmen are told to scatter and retreat. He orders the halberdiers to advance, and Hercules tells Panther Dalius that, as planned, the right flank is counting on him because he knows what to do, to which Dalius assures him everything is under control. Hercules leaves the main fortress, saying it's time to face his foolish brother. He's been eagerly waiting for this moment. From a distance, Adrien grumbles that Hercules' drums are already getting on his nerves. He doesn't understand what he's planning. A clear strategic map of two armies is shown as the battle enters its final stage. Hercules orders the archers to slowly retreat on both sides, while the halberdiers cover the withdrawal and prevent the enemy from breaking through. Panther Dalios orders the archers to fall back, the halberdiers to hold the line, and the spearmen to cover the flanks. The enemies advance but run into tight ranks of warriors, realizing they can't break through. Through the spirit of connection, Hercules orders to conserve the army's strength and hold back the enemy, preventing any advance. Adrien is furious, not understanding what these fools are doing, so he orders the light cavalry to cover the infantry, and they obediently move forward. But Galfus Galleonis sees this and growls that he won't let them pass, summoning his spirit to engulf the entire field in flames. Horses neigh in terror and bolt in panic, while the soldiers stand helplessly, unsure of what to do. Adrien grows even angrier at Galfus, shouting that even if their father is proud of him, favoring a foolish brother over the eldest son is unforgivable. Oscar looks around, completely confused by the clueless Adrien, who keeps giving one bad command after another. He thinks that judging by Hercules' troop movements, he's heading toward their flank, planning to encircle them. Oscar realizes that the current army setup only favors Hercules, meaning they are bound to lose, and he clenches his fist, unsure of what to do next. Suddenly, a warrior falls beside him, and the next moment arrows fly their way, but Oscar shields him with his shield. The warrior is surprised, and Oscar asks if he can stand up. He replies yes and gets to his feet. Oscar notices many fighters from the almond house here and decides he won't let them die. He shouts to his men that everyone will come back alive. Oscar moves forward while Adrien watches, confused. Soldiers aren't advancing, but the enemy isn't making a move either. The battle rages on. One warrior's leg is severed, and Adrien watches as he falls. He doesn't understand why even the archers aren't shooting. He has no idea where they've gone. Then he notices the soldiers just walking by and starts to panic in terror. Realizing this is a combat formation, he shouts that things are bad and orders a retreat. But just then, Karolina Galleonis from Galfus appears in front of his people, catching them completely off guard, while Adrien stands frozen in silence. Hercules is informed that the light cavalry has been dealt with, and he replies with satisfaction that it seems Adrien has finally figured it all out. Once there was an old general who crossed mountain ranges, carved his way across half a continent, and cornered the Lemurian Empire, becoming famous for his strategy. Many have tried to recreate his winning plan, but without truly understanding its essence, they all faced crushing defeat. This strategy is built on three key elements: the difference in cavalry numbers, the army's combat strength, and the commander's exceptional skills. Using lightning-fast army maneuvers delivers stunning results. It's a strategy worth remembering forever. This means complete encirclement. Adrien's warriors realize with despair that they are trapped. Adrien yells for everyone to break through and attack the archers, but Hercules lowers his hand, signaling to advance. Arrows fly at the soldiers, striking their bodies and taking their lives. Adrien falls helplessly, groaning in disbelief, painfully realizing the loss of his troops. The full encirclement strategy is a plan that guarantees victory, but is incredibly difficult to execute. First and foremost, the key was to eliminate the Bulgarian cavalry, which posed a real threat, and this was achieved without casualties and to great advantage, just as Hercules intended. Fortunately, the mercenary contracts were cancelled. The Imperial army was expanded and thoroughly trained, since before they had to rely on unpredictable mercenaries. Hercules was able to carry out this strategy only because he carefully chose his generals. Choosing the right weapons was also crucial. If the enemy had pikes or armed everyone with halberds, it would have been impossible to outsmart them. In other words, you need to choose the right weapons to build a truly strong army. The final piece of the plan was Dalios. Until now, Hercules couldn't single-handedly command 20,000 warriors, but by entrusting him with half the army, the encirclement strategy became possible. Rebuilding the army from scratch, boosting soldiers' combat readiness, and removing foreign forces from the battlefield allowed experienced generals to fully control the fight. The warriors lay down their arms and beg for mercy, promising to pay any price. One of them claims to be a vassal of one of the 77 sacred nobles, and warns that if he dies, their homes will not stay silent, but he is instantly killed, along with the others. Hiding behind their shields, the warriors press tightly together, some shouting that if Adrien is truly a nobleman, he should start negotiations with Hercules, as they panic, unsure of who they're even fighting for. Hercules smiles, then bursts out laughing and shouts to Adrien, asking if he can see and feel it. He loudly thanks him for the chance to personally recreate the legendary strategy of the past. Thank you for allowing him to be the younger brother, and for your humility. Dalios, hearing this, thinks that about 1,000 years have passed since this strategy was created, and now a 15-year-old boy stands before him having successfully carried it out, while countless others have failed. He thinks that elves live about 200 years, so he still has 185 years of experience ahead of him, and he smiles at the thought. He says he's eagerly looking forward to the future. Hercules, hearing this over the comms, asks him to repeat it, but Dalios replies it was just him thinking out loud. Panther Dalios adds that now they just need to block their path to stop them from breaking through, and asks Hercules to keep the guards in place, to which Hercules replies that he understands. He notes that maintaining a surrounding strategy is tough, like filling skin with water to the brim, but in his view, under a hail of arrows, few commanders can calm frightened warriors and rally them for a breakthrough. Hercules says it doesn't matter. Without a capable leader, they won't break free from the circle. Not a single fly will escape the trap. Suddenly, one warrior breaks free, and Hercules and Pantrodalios watch him in surprise. It's Oscar, declaring that the almond house will not fall today. He orders everyone to move forward, and the warriors follow him. Hercules' soldiers shout to regroup and hold the line without letting anyone through. Hercules asks Pantrodalios if he can break through the ring on his own. She replies that with a 1 in 100 chance he might survive. But Hercules points out that she's actually giving him a 1 in 10 chance. He adds that while this won't decide the battle's outcome, it could damage his reputation. Panther laughs, reminding that even the great general of the Lemurian Empire left the battlefield a few times, and there's nothing shameful about that. Hercules smiles and tells Pantrodalius to take a closer look. They've just discovered another remarkable talent. Most of the nobles, led by Adrien, fall under a hail of arrows surrounded by Hercules' army. Those who hired mercenaries but didn't fight or fund the army are being arrested by Christopher's men. As for Adrien, the leader of the rebellion, Edmund finds him at the fortress. Only his helmet remains. Adrien arrives at the Bulgarians' camp to ask for refuge in their kingdom. Everyone looks at each other with suspicion but eventually nods in agreement. Adriana is currently being held in custody. He's shouting for explanations and release, asking what they're planning and speaking in his own language, while the Bulgarian demands he speak so they can understand him. Bulgarinets says he already understands perfectly what's going on. Seeking refuge in the kingdom of Balgaron, Adrien was instead arrested and brought before the Lemuria court. Adrien's plan to seize the throne failed miserably. His army was defeated. The traitor to the throne, Adrien, kneels before Hercules with his hands tied, while Christopher, Karolina Gallionis, Galphus Gallionis, and Hercules himself stand nearby. On the third day after the rebellion was crushed, Adrien and 100 other conspirators will be sentenced for their crimes. Hercules demands a brief and clear answer from an aristocrat about why he took part in the rebellion. He said he wanted to protect Hercules from internal dangers. Hercules then asks why. In that case, he declared Adrien emperor. The aristocrat gets scared and stumbles over his words, while Hercules gives a crooked smile and says he was just dragged in, to which the aristocrat agrees in surprise. Hercules notices that nobles more powerful than him have taken his wealth and warriors, and asks if he knows who is responsible. The aristocrat hesitates, suspecting that Hercules is trying to deceive him. She finally exclaims that she was truly tricked, and Hercules asks who did it. He starts talking about a traitor but falters. Galphus Gallionis realizes he's just shifting the blame onto more powerful people to save himself. If he valued his life so much, he would have sworn loyalty to the emperor by now instead of kneeling there. Hercules says that as a conspirator, he should be executed along with his family, but because of the Giuliano family's many years of service, he is willing to overlook it. He sentences him to 30 years of hard labor, promising to personally watch over his family, vassals, and their loved ones. He bows deeply, thanks with all his heart, and vows to remember this kindness for the rest of his life. Then he is led away. Hercules quietly notes that in 3 years, no one will even remember this. He calls the next person, asks if they were also deceived, and poses the same questions to all the junior nobles to have a valid reason to soften the sentence, as there were strong reasons for this. You can't just wipe out all the nobles. Many families were already crushed during the rebellion, and their power had already declined. The void created after this will open the way for younger generations, who, gaining strength, will take the place of the former great houses. As Hercules himself said, the weakened nobility no longer threatens imperial power, having lost everything. Even without his intervention, only their name will remain of their former glory. So imprisonment, fines, and hard labor were a wise choice. He calls the next person and announces the third and final reason. One of Adrien's key allies, a politically influential half-elf and the highest-ranking conspirator. He knows very well that they won't dare execute him, since he's already apologized and even now has allies in the courtroom. Some people still owe him, so he's sure he can get away with it, forcing Hercules to take drastic measures. Overconfident Hans starts to speak, saying he should explain his side, but Hercules cuts him off, stating that several charges have been brought against him, leaving Hans confused and unsure of what he just heard. Hercules announces that he is stripping him of his imperial title. He is no longer a nobleman, and Hans is horrified, completely caught off guard. Hercules adds that the man will be isolated for life, and after death his body will be burned. Hans begs for mercy, but Hercules insists his suffering must last forever. Hans shouts that this can't be allowed. He's noble and being humiliated like common folk, saying it's better to kill him outright than to disgrace him like this. Hercules calls the next challenger, aiming right from the start for the highest ranks of nobility. He aimed to punish usually untouchable nobles by holding them accountable for the actions of their junior relatives, securing him absolute authority in the courtroom. Moreover, having betrayed their recent allies, these nobles are unlikely to dare oppose him again, even if they join forces with other houses. Survival is far from guaranteed, and the younger ones will come to see the whole truth. Imprisonment and confiscation for the lower houses, and imperial title stripping for the higher ones. This is how he cleansed the Lemurian imperial court of several dozen great families. Finally, they bring the main culprit, Adrien, into the room. Christopher shoves him hard, and he falls face down. He wants to object, but he's immediately silenced with a reminder that he's standing before the Emperor himself. Hercules smiles and says they haven't seen each other in a long time, calling Adrien his big brother. He asks when was the last time they spoke face to face, or maybe this is their very first meeting. Hercules says he only knew about it from his friend Lord Dominic, and asks whose idea it was to poison the melon. He adds that it was the first time he saw poison react with silver, and it was impressive. By the way, the dish was amazing too. Salty melon, sweet tomatoes, and poison all combined in such an elegant way. Adrien shrugs, saying he hasn't tried it himself, so he can't say for sure. Hercules notes that the battle on the plain will go down in history, mainly because of the complete encirclement strategy, which he believes no one will be able to replicate as successfully for hundreds of years. He asks if Adrien realizes that before the Balgeron cavalry left, they had a great chance to win, as an open battle with Balgeron's support, and the mercenaries could have brought them success, to which Adrien replies that he is unworthy of the imperial throne. Hercules stays silent while the other continues, saying he was supposed to inherit the throne from his father. But from birth, everything was given to a bastard who had no right to it. He shouts to all the aristocrats that they've been deceived by a false emperor, and urges them not to let him stay on the throne, saying this is a prophecy from the great archangel Gabriel. In his madness, he screams that the gods themselves have chosen him, and he is the rightful emperor of the great Lemurian Empire. The crowd starts whispering, wondering if he's really talking about Jibril, the archangel no one has ever seen but who supposedly appeared to Adrien, who insists it's true and even shows a feather from her wing as proof. Hercules says he understands if that's what he says, and asks to invite Lady Jibril to the hall. If she confirms, he will recognize Adrien as emperor here and now, while Karolina Gallionis panics and tries to stop him. Adrien smiles confidently, warning that Hercules will regret his words, then loudly calls upon the great archangel Jibril to reveal the truth to all and cast the deceitful emperor into hell. The hall falls silent. He doesn't understand why she hasn't shown up. Hercules waits. Adrien asks him to wait a minute, promising she will definitely come. He strains his voice, calling her again and again, pleading that she's right there and just needs to come out to him. Hercules finally says he'll give him just 3 conditions. Meet them and he'll live. First, swear loyalty and unconditional obedience to your emperor. Second, acknowledge the illegitimacy of the invasion. And third, take responsibility for the actions of the high-ranking nobles who followed him. Only then will he be able to give him life, just as his mother wished. Adrien, with a trembling voice, admits full guilt and begs for mercy. Hercules praises him for his wise decision and sentences him to life imprisonment. He orders them to take him to the dungeon, but Adrien suddenly snatches the knife from his hands. Then she pulls out scissors and pushes the soldiers away. Karolina Gallionis turns pale. Hercules is surprised, and the blades are already stained with blood. Adrien jumps at Hercules, shouting that he's going to die. Karolina rushes to hug Hercules. Christopher shields him, and Galphus Gallionis draws his sword. Just then, Jibril appears in front of Adrien and tells him it's forbidden. He stops, recognizing her. He angrily asks why she is defending the impostor when she herself said he was the true emperor. Everyone present is shocked and confused about who he's talking to. Jibril smiles and says she never talked about murder. In fact, Adrien is a pretender who will never become emperor, no matter how much he tries. He desperately asks what she means, insisting the gods chose him, but she denies it, and offers to explain why. Here, Jibril transforms into a demoness belonging to Hercules, who looks at Adrien with a smug smile. The toy is horrified to realize he's been tricked. Hercules wishes him luck, while Adrien screams in rage and curses him. Vola claims that Hercules is a devil and demands his crown back. Galphus Gallionis says he's completely lost his mind, and Christopher insists that this must never be mentioned near the emperor's tomb. The demoness greets Hercules, but he replies briefly. As a result, all the guilty were punished, and the festive banquet went on without any interruptions. Finally, a young man approaches them, and Hercules asks if he knows why he's here. It's Oscar Almond, surrounded by the ominous Galphus Galleonis and Pantera Dalios. Oscar immediately bows and begs for mercy, admitting he raised his sword against him and is ready to accept any punishment, a response Hercules did not expect. He says it's all a misunderstanding, that he won't judge him, and orders Galphus and Pantera to stop tormenting the boy. Hercules adds that he has a proposal for Oscar, who asks what it's about. He asks if Oscar wants to become a general. Oscar, confused, recalls fighting against his own country, and Hercules replies that he has been watching him and the Almond family for a long time. However, because the head of their house supported Adrien in his fight for the throne, he was arrested, and his lands and title were taken away. When the head of the household sided with Adrien, Oscar had no choice but to follow him, ending up on a doomed ship, which led to their home losing everything and ultimately affected the outcome of the war. Oscar says there's definitely a more worthy candidate, and Hercules asks who he means. He replies that it was Oscar who managed to break through the encirclement. The young man is surprised and asks if Hercules really saw it, to which he answers, of course he did. He explains that the encirclement tactic was meant to sow panic among the enemy and weaken their resistance, but Oscar broke through on the first try. Trapped inside the enemy's ring, Oscar stayed calm and saved his men, even though others in the same situation would have thought it impossible. Hercules says he values his leadership skills. Strong armies need great generals, and with his help, their forces will become even stronger. He sees this as a great chance to restore honor and glory to the Almond family. Most of their countrymen were stripped of their noble titles and sent to prison, although they escaped the death penalty. The imprisonment broke the family patriarch and dealt a heavy blow to their household. If Oscar accepts the offer, he'll have a chance to restore his family's former glory. Moreover, Hercules will overlook all the crimes of his family and, after everything that happened, personally invites Oscar to join him, recognizing him as trustworthy. Oscar bows and admits he might lack experience but asks for their support, while Hercules hopes he'll get along with the senior commanders, and Oscar beams with a wide smile. Finally, it's all over, and in the middle of the night they celebrate their victory. Well, just Karolina Galleonis and Hercules. Karolina is happy it's all behind her, while Hercules says that just as he dealt with his father's vassal states, his older brother immediately started a rebellion. Who would have thought the emperor had so many troubles? Because of this, he adds, after such hard work, any dish tastes especially delicious. Karolina smiles and says the chef has really blossomed lately, and she's glad Nala was able to inspire him. Hercules gets upset, asking why she talks about others when they're finally alone, and she blushes, admitting she's been waiting for this moment too. Hercules, with a sly smile, says he now understands why she chose such a revealing outfit, still remembering how stunning she looked in her maid costume. Karolina leans into him and admits that it's true. She is his beloved, so isn't it natural to want to give something to the one you love? Hercules hugs her and exclaims that this is wonderful. Holding her close, he asks when they'll go on their second date. She replies that the Pink Garden opens in a month, and the chariot races are coming up soon, so there will be plenty to do. Karolina is upset that he can't even take a short break from his duties. Next month is packed with meetings and inspections, while Hercules grumbles that he's well aware of it. He says the Empire has only slightly strengthened its position since his father's time, and many challenges still lie ahead. We need to improve relations with neighbors, reassign generals, rebuild the Imperial army, address hunger and unemployment, and organize governance in the newly acquired territories. It will take a long time just to deal with the Western and Eastern factions, and he doubts he'll live long enough to handle it all. Karolina says that if this is Hercules, he will succeed. He has already achieved something extraordinary. She adds that she will always be there to support whenever needed, and they silently look into each other's eyes. He says he'll thank her in advance, but she doesn't understand and asks what he means. Hercules brushes her hair away from her face and asks her to marry him, but she starts to panic. He stands up, picks a bunch of grapes, twists a vine into a ring, and slips it onto her finger. Hercules confesses his love and asks her to marry him so they can build a bright future for their country together, and she tearfully agrees. Here he is, the emperor who breathed new life into the Lemurian Empire, once teetering on the edge of a chasm that swallowed 3 continents. His name is Hercules I. His legendary deeds and reign as the Emperor of Divine Light, the story of a ruler who conquered 3 continents, still continue today.